Chapter 760. Dongqing Wudi arrived at the desert prison about 2 hours earlier than expected. At 9:50 in the morning, the helicopter landed slowly in front of the desert prison. Xiao Mahai, who got the news at the last minute, didn't even have time to inform Li Tianlan. He hurriedly came out to greet him. When he held Dongqing Wudi's outstretched palm, his upper body almost bent into the yellow sand on the ground. I was going to visit the military region of Beijiang, but I temporarily cancelled the trip. I'm early. Dongqing Wudi smiled and looked at Xiao Mahai with extremely friendly eyes. In the past 6 months, the giant group had suffered heavy losses, but the Dongqing clan had gained a lot. There were many opportunities for Dongqing Wudi to get some pretty good positions of real power, including the position of Chief of Staff of the Theater of Operations, which was originally prepared for Xiao Mahai as a reward. However, Xiao Mahai himself directly refused the transfer and held Li Tianlan's thigh firmly. This was exactly what Dongqing Wudi wanted to see most, and it was also the reason why he was willing to come here with military counselor. Therefore, although the transfer did not succeed, Dongqing Wudi appreciated Xiao Mahai more and more. Within the system, individuals could not maintain 100% absolute loyalty to the collective unless they stood at the top of the system. Dongqing Wudi had no intention of testing Xiao Mahai's loyalty. The attitude he showed that he at least had the qualifications to be trusted. Mahai, let me introduce you. This is military counselor of Samsara Palace. And this is Lieutenant General Xiao Mahai, the warden of the desert prison. It's the first time for you two to meet. You should get closer in the future. Dongqing Wudi laughed heartily. Hello, Your Excellency Military Counselor. Xiao Mahai looked up at Military Counselor and took the initiative to reach out. Military Counselor was covered in a wide cloak. No one could see his expression, but there was a very friendly smile in his voice. Hello General Xiao. Thank you for this year. It's all what I should do. Xiao Mahai, who understood what he meant, smiled and shook his head. He reached out and said, Minister, Your Excellency, please come in. Where's Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi walked into the prison and asked casually. His Highness should be meditating. Xiao Mahai said softly. Dongqing Wudi arrived 2 hours earlier. He didn't have time to inform Li Tianlan, and didn't dare to disturb his meditation, so he didn't send anyone to call him. Dongqing Wudi didn't take it seriously. He just nodded casually and patted Xiao Mahai on the shoulder. Take me around. Military counselor wants to talk to Tianlan alone. The counselor nodded to Xiao Mahai and said in a clear voice, Thank you, General. It's nothing. Xiao Mahai shook his head, called a deputy warden to lead the way for military counselor, and accompanied Dongqing Wudi to the prison area. The military counselor followed the deputy warden in silence. He was thinking about what he should say next, but his mind was calm. The interior of the prison was cold and dry. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The sound of footsteps echoed in the surroundings, and the surrounding space seemed extremely spacious. What's with these cracks? Military counselor asked casually. He had long noticed the damage to the desert prison. Under the sunlight and yellow sand of the outside world, the countless cracks looked inconspicuous, but as soon as he walked into the prison, the cracks that bloomed like a spider's web on the walls and the ground suddenly became shocking. It suddenly appeared last night. The warden has already sent people to repair it. The deputy warden said respectfully. It suddenly appeared last night. Military counselor pondered for a while. When he was about to speak, he suddenly found that the deputy warden who led the way in front of him stopped subconsciously. The dry and cold air in front of him instantly turned into the most eerie cold. The sharpness, which looked like a sword but was not a sword, gradually covered them. It was fierce and gloomy. Standing in this sharpness, military counselor's body tensed subconsciously, and he didn't dare to move for a moment. Ahead is the residence of His Highness. The deputy warden's face was pale. He didn't dare to move forward, and just pointed to a dormitory door in front of him. Military counselor took a deep breath, feeling the sharpness around him, and said in a deep voice, Your Highness, I'm military counselor. His voice spread out in the silent space, bringing with it an echo. After a short silence, the dormitory door in his sight opened silently. Li Tianlan's hoarse voice sounded brief and indifferent. Come in. Military counselor narrowed his eyes and stepped forward carefully. The sharpness in the air moved forward quietly. It was very slow, but it would cover the whole prison sooner or later. Military counselor's figure became more and more cautious. It took him a full 5 minutes to reach the door, which was less than 100 meters away. Inside the door was a hazy and somewhat fake world. The sharpness seemed to completely tear all the space in the dormitory apart. The fragmented space kept floating, and the air was twisted. A thin figure stood in a fuzzy space, motionless. Your Highness. Military counselor's voice was calm. In the dormitory, Li Tianlan raised his hand casually. The sharpness that was condensed to the extreme suddenly became stable. The fragmented space continued to gather, and everything in front of him suddenly became clear. Military counselor gasped. He stared at Li Tianlan, who had lost a lot of weight in front of him, and took a step back subconsciously. At the moment when the space turned from blurry to clear, the military counselor vaguely saw a divine weapon that had been completely unsheathed. Its sharpness was shocking, and the extreme danger and sharpness even suppressed his instincts in the shortest time possible. Your Highness, you. Military counselor took a deep look at Li Tianlan, then took a deep breath and said, You gave up your biggest advantage? Advantage is meaningless. Li Tianlan said blandly. Only real strength is meaningful. But this path is wrong. Military counselor's voice was a little annoyed. For hundreds of years, how many people who have taken this path have a good ending? He was not Xiaomahai. At this moment, he could almost see Li Tianlan's current problem at a glance. The feeling of danger was too sharp. In military counselor's perception, this kind of oppression was even close to the level of the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan's current combat capability might not be at the peak of the invincible realm, but it was definitely not far from it. What level was this? If distance was an explanation, Gu Xingyun, the former god of war of Zhongzhou State, flaming fire of Samsara Palace, even the deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican who hid his strength, and Paul, the patriarch of Rothschild who had been in the limelight in Eastern Europe, were all experts at this level. Li Tianlan was less than 25 years old this year, but his real combat capability had already touched this level. This was not a good thing at all. His current state seemed to explain this. When military counselor saw him, he had already determined the path he had chosen. What was Li Tianlan's strongest point? From the perspective of battle prowess, his strongest point was naturally his sword intent. But overall his strongest point was the dragon vein in his body. The endless life force of the dragon vein gave him a body that could directly walk to the end of the martial path. But now Li Tianlan was deliberately giving up his body. He was deliberately lowering his body's endurance, and pursuing the most terrifying combat capability in the fastest way. This was undoubtedly the diabolical path in martial arts. The advantage was that the speed of progress was amazing. It was the real way to achieve martial arts quickly. Military counselor thought of the map of God of War of the Li family, which had shocked the Dark World for hundreds of years. The map of God of War contained all the unique skills and inheritances of the Li family. The map of God of War pursued the balance of all aspects of martial arts. It used the flawless martial arts to control the strongest sword and break everything. But the path Li Tianlan chose now was almost the opposite of the map of God of War. It was very much like the path that the ancestor of the Lin clan, who created the map of God of War, took at the beginning. He did not care about his own weaknesses or the enemy's weaknesses. Such a path did not care about anything. He was a real invincible magic weapon. Wherever his edge passed, everything would be turned into ashes. The ancestor of the Lin clan had indeed made extraordinary achievements on this path. The Lin clan and the Li family today were enough to prove this. But the problem was, if this path was correct, why did he modify his own unique skills and create the map of God of War? Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan. A fiery light appeared in his eyes. Should I congratulate you? He asked suddenly. His tone was very serious, but his eyes were full of complexity. Congratulate me? Congratulate me for finding the most suitable path for me? Then I should really congratulate you. Li Tianlan smiled. The next second, his whole body flew out directly. The quiet military counselor approached him in an instant. grabbed his neck with both hands, and slammed his body against the wall. Li Tianlan could dodge and even fight back, but in the end he did nothing. Bang! In the loud vibration, Li Tianlan's back collided with the wall. The alloy wall kept shaking, and some cracks expanded again. Li Tianlan's face turned pale, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth into a thin line of blood. You will fucking die. You will die, do you know that? Military counselor's voice, which was so angry that he almost lost his mind, roared, almost covering half of the prison. I congratulate you. Look at you now. Look at yourself. An ordinary half-step invincible realm expert can bear this kind of collision. You are fucking vomiting blood now. Is your so-called path right? Bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit. You can succeed. If you continue like this, in 5 years, or even 3 years, you can reach Wang Tianzong's original height. Then what? How old are you then? 26? 28? You can't even live to 30 years old. What's the use of being invincible in the world? You will die. Li Tianlan coughed. Wisps of white mist spread out, and his shaken internal organs healed quickly. He looked into Military Counselor's eyes. Military Counselor's eyes were full of almost crazy anger and regret, but this kind of regret was not for him but for others. Bang! Li Tianlan's body shook casually, and Military Counselor's body was directly shaken a few steps back. Li Tianlan straightened up and said lightly, "Watch your attitude." My attitude? What attitude do you want? You are powerful, but I am not your opponent. Even now no one in the dark world is your opponent. You are invincible, so what? Invincible for a few years? You don't even have your own children now, and you want to die so much? Why should I pay attention to my attitude? Kill me if you have the guts, so that I can go down in advance and tell the palace master what the person she risked everything to help in Eastern Europe is like now. Li Tianlan suddenly fell silent. Military Counselor panted and stared at Li Tianlan. The temperature in his eyes slowly disappeared, and even the flames became cold. You are too excited. Li Tianlan said. No. Military Counselor shook his head. He looked a little tired, as if he was at a loss after a long time of repression. I just feel that it's not worth it. He really felt that it was not worth it. It was not worth it for the woman who had planned for many years and finally put everything on the line in Eastern Europe. She really did her best to do everything. If she saw Li Tianlan now, how sad would she be? Military Counselor's heart ached. He didn't even dare to think about this question. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said slowly, Have you found the remains of the palace master? The 5 countries in Eastern Europe, Snow Country, and the Wang family of Beihai were all looking for the remains of the master of Samsara Palace in Mormons. This was also an important condition of his deal with the Wang family of Beihai. Military Counselor had always been in charge of this matter. No. Military Counselor shook his head and didn't seem to want to say more. It's not worth it or not. It's my own choice. Li Tianlan glanced at him. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing. Why did you make yourself like this? Military Counselor sneered. It's hard for me to explain this phenomenon for the time being. But if I want my body to recover, it's not difficult for me. The vitality of the dragon vein has been strengthening my body's endurance. So before the lethality completely surpasses the invincible realm, I can always pursue the greatest lethality. The dragon vein can slowly repair my body. You're not here at the right time. I'm in the most delicate period. You can see that every time I fight, I'm basically injured. But in 2 months, this problem should be solved. I have endless vitality, which can form a new balance with the path I chose. Li Tianlan said calmly. Military Counselor frowned and looked at Li Tianlan. Really? Do you remember the mysterious chosen one who attacked the Wang family of Beihai half a year ago? Li Tianlan asked, his eyes a little dazed. Military Counselor's eyes flickered. If I'm not wrong, the other party should have endless vitality similar to the dragon vein, so he chose this similar path like me. He's not old. If he didn't come to the end of this path, he couldn't have such destructive power. Combined with his age, that kind of powerful power should also be squeezing the limit of his body's endurance. Li Tianlan said softly. So this is your martial arts in the future? Military counselor asked slowly. The ultimate martial art still needs balance. Li Tianlan smiled. But I don't need it now, at least not before I surpass the invincible realm. He flicked his fingers and the sword intent condensed into ice in the air. The palm-sized ice floated in front of military counselor, which was like pouring a glass of water for him. Li Tianlan waved his hand and said, "Sit down." Military counselor took a deep breath, suppressed his inner excitement, and sat opposite Li Tianlan. "Let's get down to business," Li Tianlan said slowly. "What do you want to do today?" Military counselor took a deep look at him, hesitated and said softly, "I want to give your highness a suggestion." "Say it," Li Tianlan said without raising his head. "I suggest that your highness stay here for a while," military counselor said seriously. Chapter 761. Li Tianlan took a deep look at military counselor. It was an accident that the other party suddenly came here, and his suggestion was even more of an accident. He had been imprisoned in the desert prison for a year, especially in the last 6 months. All his energy was focused on martial arts, and he did not pay attention to anything in the outside world, nor did he express any opinion on other things. Under such circumstances, military counselor suggested that he stay here for a while. Did he mean that the outside world was still stable? Moreover, if he could say such a thing, from another perspective, could it be that he could leave at any time now? What happened in the outside world in the past 6 months? Tell me your reason. Li Tianlan looked at him and said calmly. In fact, half a year ago, President Li Huaqing talked to Minister Dongqing about this issue. In principle, he has agreed not to restrict you, but the news was suppressed by Minister Dongqing. In the past 6 months, Zhongzhou state has been very lively. A few days ago, the president talked to the minister again about this issue, but the minister still did not agree. But there is news that in a few days, the other party should send a heavyweight to invite you out of prison in person. Military counselor said softly, "But the minister and I hope you can stay here for the time being." "I'm asking for your reason." Li Tianlan pulled out a special military cigarette, lit it and said softly, "Because of freedom." Military counselor said seriously, "If there is no accident, the rumor is likely to be true, and it may be that Hua Jingyang personally comes to the desert prison to invite you out of prison. The other party is very sincere, but I hope you can refuse, because the real freedom is in your own hands." Military counselor picked up a stack of documents from the side and handed them to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Hua Jingyang personally came to the desert prison to invite him out of prison? This could indeed be said to be the greatest sincerity of the academics and the prince group. Hua Jingyang was not an ordinary member of Zhongzhou state, but one of the 9 directors, the second in command of the cabinet, and the leader of the academics. He could represent the will of both sides. To a certain extent, his coming was tantamount to giving Li Tianlan enough face. As long as he nodded, the matter of Qi Mulan could be completely over. He reached out to take the documents handed over by military counselor and glanced at them. Most of the information was about the more important things that happened in the past 6 months, covering a wide range of fields. On the 3rd day of February, the Wang family of Beihai launched a search involving the entire province. The search lasted for a week, and nearly 6,000 intelligence agents of various forces lurking in Beihai were arrested one by one. Wang Shengxiao refused the requests of the major forces to ransom them. He personally executed all the intelligence agents with a sword, and the blood completely dyed Beihai. On the 12th day of February, Xia Ji secretly entered the Hidden Dragon Sea to visit Li Huaqing. The 23rd day of February, the plan to recall the first batch of veterans of the North Sea Legion thus drew to a close. During this time, close to 100,000 veterans of the North Sea Legion had been re-enlisted. Beihai Conan. Beihai officially launched its conscription plan, with an estimated recruitment of 800,000 soldiers. In early March, Zhongzhou State held a parliamentary meeting. Dongqing Wudi strongly supported the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. In mid-March, Qinzhou Province, known as the Backyard Garden of the Giant Group, changed its commander. Tiansu, the speaker of Qinzhou, was transferred to Yuzhou. The reputation of the Tian family of the giant group declined greatly. The speaker of Qinzhou was a young man from the academics. At the end of March, Zhou Yunhai, the leader of the North Group, fired at the giant group in person, with the full support of the academics and the Prince Group. In early April, the deputy minister of the police department close to the giant group was transferred. In the same month, the Zhongzhou State Conference was held. The council rejected Dongqing Wudi's proposal that Bai Qingzhao serve as the Secretary General of the Army headquarters. The person in charge of a large fleet in Beihai of Zhongzhou State was taken over. A storm swept through the military without warning, and a vice-admiral with real power in the navy fell from his horse. The North conglomerate suddenly took action, and Zhou Yunhai used this game to completely stabilize his authority in the police department. At the same time, he took over the military power of Northern City. At the end of April, the boss of a large state-owned enterprise retired early, and the boss of a large bank in Zhongzhou State was secretly investigated. At the beginning of May, the Wang family of Beihai's 3 listed companies in Huading, Wuxia, and Yuzhou were suppressed, and a large number of shares were quickly annexed. In mid-May, after Su Xinghe, the governor of the Southeast Group was implicated and transferred from his current post because of the acquisition of the listed company. At the same time, Yu Chuanguang, the mayor of Huading and a close friend of Wang Xiaoyao, was transferred to Wuxia as the governor. Zhang Xiaohua, the director of Huading and the minister of supervision, was transferred to the Ministry of Supervision in Yuzhou. A capable general of the North Group was transferred to Huading as the mayor. From May of this year, all the achievements of the Southeast Group in plotting against Huading for several years were completely destroyed. At the same time, because Yu Chuanguang, who stood beside Wang Xiaoyao, had a firm stand, he cooperated with Wang Qinglei tacitly after he was transferred to Wuxia. For the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, when their achievements in Huading were destroyed, they officially lost control of Wuxia. For hundreds of years, this had been the most developed province in Zhongzhou State. It had been controlled by the Southeast Group, and it was their strongest fortress and back garden. For hundreds of years, until May of this year, Wuxia province was lost. This could be said to be the heaviest loss suffered by the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai in recent decades. Within the Southeast Group, Wang Qinglei had completely fallen out with Yi Dongsheng. He grasped Wuxia tightly and was ready to make a move. The academics and the Prince Group seemed to be satisfied for the time being. They temporarily shifted their target from the Southeast Group, and all the firepower was aimed at the giant group at the same time. A storm. The North Group. It was still the North Group. The North Group, which seemed to have tasted the sweetness, once again became the vanguard. After the honeymoon period of cooperation between the academics and the giant group for several years, the first thing the academics wanted to take back was Liaodong, which used to belong to them. At the end of May, 2 directors close to Bai Qingqian and Liaodong were replaced. One belonged to the North Group, and the other belonged to the academics. In mid-June, General Nan, one of Dongqing Wudi's most valued backbone generals, and the commander of the Navy of Zhongzhou State, was transferred to Yuzhou. Under the full opposition of the Southeast Group and the Giant Group, General Nan's position was changed from the Deputy Minister of National Defense of Zhongzhou State to the Deputy Minister of the General Staff. He was promoted but secretly demoted. However, compared with the initial result, General Nan at least retained some real power. A series of purges were carried out within the Navy. The North Group expanded once again, and the academics and the Prince Group occupied the majority of the profits. At the end of June, the Southeast Group, which had gradually stabilized, was in turmoil again. Fan Tianyin, the Minister of Security, voluntarily resigned from his position, which seemed to be the compensation given to the giant group by the Southeast Group. At the beginning of July, after a short and intense game and operation, Fireman, who used to belong to the Li family's sacred guards and was known as the strongest fire-flaming realm expert, officially became the Minister of Security of Zhongzhou State. Everything seemed to have undergone some subtle changes during this period of time. Li Tianlan looked at it carefully. Military counselor handed him the information. There was a list below each matter, which was the final voting result of the parliament. The list appeared again and again. It could be seen that the plenary meeting of the Parliament of Zhongzhou State was held very diligently during this period. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at it carefully. His eyes flickered when he looked at the list. There was no change in the attitude of the 9 directors on the list. But as time went by and events were updated, the attitude of some of the members below gradually changed. Some of the members who originally belonged to the academics and the Prince group seemed to have different voices. In order to confirm this, Li Tianlan glanced down again. In July, the Minister of the Riot Control Department encountered a lot of reports. Although this senior general, who had always been close to the giant group, was finally taken down, the voting result became more and more interesting. At the end of July, the commander of the Black Dragon Army of the Border Control Corps and Lieutenant General Thunder God of Zhongzhou State was included in the adjustment list by the military. At the council meeting, Dongcheng Wudi seemed to be unable to bear it. He flew into a rage and directly smashed a glass in the conference room. He even almost fought with a member of the Prince group in the conference room. The adjustment was finally cancelled. The North group, which had been playing a vanguard role recently, was silent this time and completely abstained. And the voting result inside the academics and the Prince group changed again. At the end of August, just a few days ago, the governor of Nanyue province was transferred to a deputy minister of a department in Yuzhou. He was also a backbone of a family in the giant group. The North group exerted its power again. Although it didn't get the position of president, it successfully won the position of a council member in Nanyue province. And the voting result became more and more obvious. In the voting result again and again, there were members of the academics and the Prince group who began to oppose the proposal of Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. This kind of opposition was very subtle. The people who opposed it were different every time, but there were people every time. It showed that the two groups had begun to be in turmoil. Was it because of the recent fierce game that affected the general trend of the country? Or was it because of other reasons? Li Tianlan glanced at military counselor and said in a deep voice, "What's the matter?" "What do you see?" Military counselor said with a smile. "The North group has developed very fast in the past 6 months. Their strength has increased a lot, but some members of parliament have some problems with their attitudes," Li Tianlan said in a low voice. "Indeed, it's for this reason that Hua Xingyang recently came to the desert prison to ask you to go out. They have gotten satisfactory benefits from the giant group. In order to calm some voices, they are now ready to let go of you, the main contradiction, and continue to target the Wang family of Beihai together. In other words, they decided to give you freedom." Military counselor said blandly, "But I don't think you need charity." "Your Highness." Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "Have you ever thought about controlling a group that can control the general trend of Zhongzhou State?" "For example?" Li Tianlan said blandly. "For example, the giant group." Military counselor said seriously. "The giant group? Hee, after I go out, will the giant group still have the ability to control the general trend?" "Of course, and it will be stronger than now." Military counselor said affirmatively. "On what basis?" Li Tianlan glanced at him. "Because I'm military counselor." Military counselor paused, suddenly raised his hand and took off his cloak. A thin middle-aged face that Li Tianlan was familiar with appeared in front of Li Tianlan with an easygoing smile. "Tianlan." He chuckled and took the initiative to reach out his hand. "Let me reintroduce myself. I'm military counselor. We haven't seen each other for a long time." Li Tianlan's body shook, and his eyebrows suddenly raised. He stared at the middle-aged man in front of him, and was silent for a long time before he took a deep breath. "It's you." Chapter 762. The room was silent. Li Tianlan looked at military counselor quietly. Military counselor slowly withdrew his outstretched hand, and looked at Li Tianlan calmly. "It was you. But how could it be you?" Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a conversation he had with military counselor in Huading more than 3 years ago. At that time, military counselor had already told him that the headquarters of Samsara Palace was in Zhongzhou State. It was in a place that everyone could see but could not perceive. Such a headquarters had no specific address, but it was the core of a large force and a very stable bond. Military counselor directly controlled the headquarters of Samsara Palace. You're surprised. Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan and smiled. He took off his cloak, and his attitude changed slightly. His temperament became calmer. I once heard from Yuetong that there are a few people in Zhongzhou state who seem to be low-key, but in fact, even the Wang family of Beihai has to treat them with caution. There are not many such people, and you are one of them. Li Tianlan said slowly. No, it should be said that you can even rank first. You mean the threat list of the major groups? Military counselor raised his eyebrows. I know this thing. It's meaningless. I don't know the so-called threat list, but the Wang family of Beihai really attaches great importance to you. Li Tianlan said blandly. He had begun to think quickly about how much impact military counselor's true identity would have on the whole Zhongzhou state once it was exposed. Has the Wang family of Beihai already suspected your identity? No. Military counselor shook his head. I've never done anything, and there's nothing suspicious about me. I've cooperated with the Wang family of Beihai the most, so they are the most guarded against me. In terms of hard strength, I'm sure I can't compete with the Wang family of Beihai. In some aspects, Samsara Palace is very advantageous. But the short-term development of Samsara Palace can't surpass that of Beihai, which has been accumulating for hundreds of years. Wang Tianzong is afraid of me because he doesn't know what I want and my weakness. Other groups are afraid of me because of this. Military counselor handed Li Tianlan a cigarette. In the lingering smoke, his voice was a little erratic. Your Highness, do you know the threat list of the major groups? Tell me the details. Li Tianlan was expressionless. He was not in a good mood. It was not because of military counselor's change in attitude or his subtle loyalty. It was because of his instinctive reaction when he was facing a behemoth that nominally belonged to him, but he could not control at all. This was different from when he learned that Saint was Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana sword master of Mount Shu. Mount Shu was very strong and its swords were scattered in the southwest. It could be said to outshine the others in the entire southwest special warfare field, but Li Tianlan still did not feel threatened. As for the military counselor, he controlled part of the core power of the Samsara Palace. To put it bluntly, not to mention the newly established Emperor Dong's palace, even the Wang family of Beihai at its peak, with Wang Tianzong in charge, if the military counselor went crazy regardless of the consequences, the entire Wang family of Beihai would be dragged into a quagmire that they could not extricate themselves from. If the military counselor was his enemy now, Emperor Dong's palace would not even have the right to breathe in the face of his suppression. That was because the military advisor had no weaknesses. He didn't have a so-called family. As long as he hid abroad with his family, he could ignore everything. At this point, even someone as strong as Wang Tianzong, or the future Li Tianlan couldn't do it. The former had Beihai, while the latter had Tiannan in the future. This was their biggest fetter. The so-called threat list is a specific statistic of some people who have the strength and potential to cause great harm to Zhongzhou state. The biggest feature of this list is that the people in Zhongzhou state are not controlled by the six, but do not belong to foreign forces. How many people like this can there be? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and shook his head. Not many. As far as I know, not only the Wang family of Beihai, but also my name ranks first in the threat list of the six. From this point of view, Your Highness, even if Emperor Dong's palace rises and you enter the peak of the invincible realm, you are still not as good as me, military counselor said with a smile. So Yuetong reminded me more than once that you are the most important person in the entire Zhongzhou state. Li Tianlan said quietly. That little girl. She studied in my place for a while. Of course, I didn't teach her myself. She is actually a very good administrator, but Wang Tianzong spoils her too much. Military counselor shook his head and looked at Li Tianlan with a faint smile. What else did she say? Was it after I bumped into you? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said lightly, It doesn't matter. What matters is that what she said makes sense. It doesn't matter, military counselor said softly. Your Highness, what matters is that we are on the same side now. Li Tianlan said indifferently, without any emotional fluctuations. He looked at military counselor's eyes quietly and said in a calm voice, Are you? Of course. Military Counselor's voice was calm. At least now your highness and I are on the same side. Then when will it not be? Li Tianlan said with a faint smile. Military Counselor was silent for a while and said slowly, "After I give you all the things the palace master left for your highness, I hope to retire." Li Tianlan's palm trembled slightly. He thought of the master of Samsara Palace who had fallen in Mormonts, and whose remains had not been found so far. He thought of the meeting between the two. He lowered his head and said indifferently, "What else did she leave for me?" "A saber," Military Counselor said, "the sharpest saber." Li Tianlan glanced at him. Military Counselor had said that he was the saber holder of Samsara Palace. Saber? He whispered to himself and laughed at himself. "I thought you would say that she left me a group that could control the overall situation of Zhongzhou State." "Not only a group." Military Counselor corrected him seriously. "Saber is the core of the entire Samsara Palace. You can even understand it this way. Samsara Palace is the name of an organization. Saber is also the name of an organization. But no matter what the name is, it is the power in the hands of the palace master, and the power she asked me to give to your highness. If you look at it from another perspective, Samsara Palace actually didn't exist, and neither did Saber." Li Tianlan glanced at him. "Speak human language. What is Saber?" "It's an organization," Military Counselor said in a serious manner. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he clenched his fists. In his heart, thousands of grass mud horses were roaring and galloping, almost overturning the whole desert. He smiled stiffly and reminded her, "You just said that they don't exist." "It depends on which aspect you understand it from," Military Counselor said slowly. "It exists, but it also doesn't exist. Such an organization has no headquarters, no clear internal rules, and no rules that members of the organization need to abide by. There is very little information flow within the organization, and it never pays attention to anything. I'm the man with the saber, but I'm not the leader of Saber. Neither is the palace master. Such an organization has no headquarters and rules, and there is no so-called leader. From this point of view, Your Highness, you can understand this organization as a market." "A market?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "Yes, a market. There are even no so-called orders and obedience here. There are only two words in the organization that are the most important." Military Counselor said seriously, "Interest demands and supply needs. So it's a market and also a platform." Li Tianlan stretched out his hand and motioned for him to continue. "As of 3 months ago, I roughly estimated that there are more than 30,000 people in the organization, among which there are nearly 200 officials above the level of deputy governor. The industries in the organization have been designed to cover nearly 400 fields in Zhongzhou State, such as clothing, food, housing, transportation, energy, weapons, financial stocks, network media, survey, aerospace, and so on. Let's not talk about the political level. Just talking about these industries, if they are all gathered together, we can mobilize more than 200 trillion funds in an instant. Speaking of other aspects, we can spread our voice throughout Zhongzhou State in an instant. Your Highness, do you know what this means?" Li Tianlan's heart suffered a huge shock. 200 trillion. Not 20 billion. Not 200 billion. Not 2 trillion. It was 200 trillion. It's impossible. Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously. This was even enough to overthrow all the orders. "What's impossible?" Military Counselor was a little confused. "Your Highness, did you say 200 trillion? You should pay attention to one thing. There's a precondition for the 200 trillion. That is, we have to integrate all our forces. In fact, this is simply impossible. We can only use a small part of it, a very, very small part. Mobilizing resources requires a precondition." Military Counselor was a little helpless. Li Tianlan's heart moved. "Is this the need you mentioned?" "Yes, someone has a need, so someone will provide resources, and finally, there will be cooperation. For example, if you want to make a movie, you need a series of preparations. In the early stage of operation, you will find different people and get through different relationships. Finally, you will form a small circle with the movie as the core. Everyone in this small circle has other connections behind them, and then a larger network of contacts is formed. Another example is that a member of parliament owes me a favor, and a mayor needs to seek a position at the level of deputy governor. I bring together people who have a need for benefits, and those who can satisfy the need for benefits. If this matter is successful, then I will affect another small circle. I don't know if you can understand, but this is Saber, an obscure but almost omnipotent platform. Even many of the parties involved don't know that they are a member of Saber. What's the point? Li Tianlan shook his head. This is not an organization. It is almost equivalent to a miniature society. But when it comes to individuals, it is a behemoth that is too big to be controlled. You can't control it, and neither can I. You are too ambitious, military counselor said meaningfully. The military counselor said meaningfully. Of course, it's impossible to control the complete Saber. However, countless circles radiate each other. In the beginning, there has to be a source, or rather a core. Once we control the core circle, we can influence some of the forces on the periphery. By influencing and radiating each other, we can form a real general trend. Your Highness, I can't give you the complete Saber because it's not mine. However, I can give you the core part that I can influence. He took out a list and handed it to Li Tianlan. These are the core members of the organization, but they are not my subordinates. They are important allies in the organization. Saber will not lead others, so there is no so-called dominance. The original intention of establishing the organization is not to control anything. We don't need loyalty. What we need is to use all kinds of power to create a situation that can satisfy us. I call this model the ally model. We use each other to get what we need. He patted the list in his hand. They are all here. Chapter 763. Incredible and indescribable. Li Tianlan couldn't understand all the meaning of the saber for the time being, but just a part of what he understood from the conversation was enough to make him feel emotional. Samsara Palace had no so-called foundation or headquarters. When it was first established, it built a real micro-society. Li Tianlan looked down at the list in his hand. The list was not long, but in a specific field, every name on it could be said to be famous. High officials, generals, wealthy families, scholars, stars, they had everything they needed. These were the core personnel that military counselors could influence in their respective fields. Influence, not control. Ally mode. Li Tianlan thought about these 4 words seriously. For a moment, he felt that the more he thought about it, the more interesting it was. He looked at the list in his hand again. After a long time he nodded and whispered, "The creativity of a genius." The creativity is not outstanding. The difficulty lies in the resources. Military counselor said calmly. "You did a good job." Li Tianlan said slowly. His voice was very deep. This was not praise. It was admiration. "If I were you, I couldn't do it. I believe that even Wang Tianzong can't do it. Because I am military counselor." Military counselor said in a deep voice, "I know my position very well, and I know what I want. I also know that the saber doesn't belong to anyone." He paused, shook his head, and said with a self-deprecating smile, "For so many years I've been trembling with fear and treading on thin ice. Hey, I'm really tired." "You've worked hard." Li Tianlan's eyes wandered on the list in front of him, thinking about the so-called saber. Military counselor said that the difficulty lay in the resources. But there was one thing he was missing. Or quality. That was absolute rationality, or rather, self-restraint. For Li Tianlan, this was a difficult problem. Or he didn't like this so-called ally mode very much. A behemoth that could exert influence but was illusory and almost non-existent. Unlike groups and countries, there was no specific organizational structure. What could ensure the vitality of this kind of organization was never power, but restraint. Li Tianlan couldn't evaluate which was more advantageous between this mode and the group for a while. The members of the group were united, their standpoint was clear, and they had a clear sense of the overall situation. They knew when to advance and when to retreat. Everyone could find a clear direction in the group. However, the ally mode did not need these. At the very beginning, this mode was extremely naked and used each other. What you could give me, I could give you. Everything was clear. There was no so-called loyalty or standpoint here, only obligations. However, this loose mode could make a clear voice within the major groups and form a visible force. It would not arouse too much vigilance. This was undoubtedly the most suitable mode for the Samsara Palace. As for the military counselor, as the hand holding the saber, he had only been quietly developing over the past many years. He had never tried to control any resources. Because of this, the area that the saber could influence was getting bigger and bigger. However, it could only be said to be an influence, not control. This kind of model did not allow for any ambition to forcefully control anything. Li Tianlan looked at the list in front of him. It could be said to be the core of the saber. The military counselor could not control them, but as an important ally of Blade, the fact that the military counselor had given him this list proved that he could exert great influence over the people on the list. Li Tianlan did not deny that these people could help him. But he did not like this kind of uncontrollable situation. He could not be as rational as the military counselor. Therefore, when he took over the organization, in the process of power centralization, the power would inevitably shrink, and to a considerable extent. I don't like it very much. Li Tianlan knocked on the list in front of him and said bluntly, there are too many uncertainties. I can understand. Military counselor nodded. But this is the best mode. How much of this organization can you control? Li Tianlan asked. I have never tried to control them. They are allies, not subordinates. Your Highness, in other words, this model is actually effective in all the major groups. Members of parliament within the group, and even the Li family, can be said to be important allies of the group. And the senior officials they promote are their core circle. This circle has countless resources and interests, so it eventually forms a larger and larger circle. First, it's allies, then it's the core circle of the allies, and finally, it's some fields that are radiated. When all of these add up, it's the group. And there are 6 such groups, that is to say 6 circles, so today's Zhongzhou state is formed. Military counselor said helplessly. But this is not a group. Li Tianlan knocked on the list. This is Blade. It doesn't matter. Military counselor gave a wry smile. Every group is formed through countless entanglements of interests, and after a long time, the tacit understanding between generations. Saber has clearly defined the obligations of every ally. It looks a little naked, and the structure is very loose, but we've shortened the process of forming a group by many times. It looks nondescript, but when it comes to operation, the effect is the same. What if I ask you to control some resources in the organization as much as possible? How much can you control? Li Tianlan looked into military counselor's eyes and asked slowly. Military counselor took a serious look at him, and kept silent for a long time. I've asked someone to make a general model. Well, I've asked a lot of people including sociologists, psychologists, financial experts, and so on. It involves a lot of things such as finance, interpersonal relationships, psychology, politics, law. I've been working on this model since you appeared, but it wasn't until recently that I received a rough version. If I break the structure of Blade now and start to centralize the power, it will take us about 5 to 10 years to complete the transformation with the full cooperation of the giant group. In the end, we can probably retain about 3 to 5% of the current strength of the organization. Even the most optimistic estimate is that the power we can directly control will not exceed 7%. Li Tianlan was speechless. He still couldn't quite understand the power of Blade, which needed specific operation to see the whole picture. Naturally, he couldn't understand what 7 out of 500% meant. He only knew that the degree of shrinkage was severe, directly shrinking dozens of times. Of course, even if it's only 5%, the specific power is roughly equivalent to more than 60% of the power of the North Group. Well, I mean the North Group 6 months ago. Military counselor said with a smile. Oh. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and thought of something. He said slowly, so you mean that the 5% you mentioned is equivalent to the power you can directly control now? Its influence. Military counselor's voice was very implicit. He pointed to the list and said, they are our allies. I respect them enough, and they respect me enough. Li Tianlan picked up the list again. Is this the 5%? He looked at the names on the list carefully, narrowed his eyes, and finally stopped at a name. Zhou Yu, Zhongzhou State Northern City Councilor, Deputy Speaker. He was Zhou Yunhai's nephew. To be exact, he was the future successor of the North Group. His significance in the North Group was equivalent to Wang Jingxin's significance in the Southeast Group, and Zhou Yuanshan's significance in the Giant Group. And now, an important ally. Li Tianlan smiled and said frankly, 5% is not enough. 7% is not enough either. This is the limit of my ability. Military Counselor smiled and deliberately emphasized a certain word. Li Tianlan glanced at him. But this is not necessarily the limit of my ability. It's the limit of my ability. In terms of management, I'm not as good as you. Li Tianlan said casually. He had never been arrogant, but he would not belittle himself either. If it was just about martial arts talent, he did not think that anyone in Zhongzhou State or even the whole Dark World was worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as him. But to run a big force, manage everything well, be a qualified leader, and even be a great strategist, he did not think he had this ability. He knew a lot of things, but he could not be the opponent of those old foxes who were immersed in it all year round. With his age and experience, it was even difficult for him to figure out the specific meaning of the saber, let alone control it. It's not just a matter of management. The saber has developed to this point. What you see in front of you is already the limit, Your Highness. Military Counselor said calmly. There are some things that I have, but Your Highness doesn't. Similarly, there are some things that Your Highness has, but I don't. For example? Li Tianlan rubbed the list in his hand. For example, the Giant Group. Military Counselor said meaningfully. This is also a resource. And it is a resource that Your Highness can completely control. The saber is an ally, and resources are more important than anything else. Your Highness can completely control the Giant Group, so you can naturally use these resources to give our allies greater support, and even pave the way for them. In return, they can also give Your Highness greater feedback. You're wrong about one thing. The Giant Group is not a resource that I control. There are so many powerful families, and there are always some who don't like me. Li Tianlan smiled. There are indeed, Military Counselor said with a meaningful smile. But aren't they disappearing now? Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Military Counselor's voice continued. Reshuffling is the basis of the cooperation between the Giant Group and the Southeast Group. The Southeast Group temporarily adjusted its plan and lowered its position in Zhongzhou State for the next few decades to stabilize the overall situation and eliminate the influence that Wang Qinglei brought to the Southeast Group. The Giant Group also urgently needs reshuffling, or even transformation, and begins to centralize power from the previous loose structure. Simply put, the future of the Southeast Group is centered on Wang Shengxiao and Wang Jingxin, and all those who don't agree with this will be eliminated. The Giant Group is centered on you and Zhou Yuanshan, and those who don't agree will also be eliminated. This approach is tantamount to scraping the bones to cure the poison. Even if it succeeds, the vitality will be greatly damaged. Li Tianlan frowned and said slowly. The Wang family of Beihai has to do this. They are bound to compromise. In this case, it's better to take the opportunity to clean up some disobedient people. The strength of the group will shrink, but the cohesion will be stronger. Although the Giant Group is also shrinking. Military Counselor smiled and reached out to pat the list. But our allies are enough to help us get through the period of weakness. Li Tianlan thought of the North Group's countless vanguards in the past 6 months. He thought of Zhou Yu, the successor of the North Group. He thought of the shrinking Giant Group. All this was just because of the addition of a military counselor, or an ally mode. Everything became different. Tell me what you think. Li Tianlan looked at military counselor. I have no idea. It's not suitable for you to leave the desert prison now. Your appearance can only further intensify the contradictions within the Giant Group. It's not suitable for reshuffling. Military Counselor smiled and said, and our allies are still looking forward to your growth. You need stronger persuasion to make them firm in their positions. The desert prison is very good. It's very quiet here. Enough for you to calm down and become stronger and stronger. Think about Wang Tianzong. He won't intervene in too many specific affairs in the Wang family of Beihai, but with him, the entire Beihai is very stable. Why? Because he is invincible in the world. When a person is truly invincible in the world, his deterrence is no longer limited to martial arts. Only in that case can you control more of the power inside the saber. As for the outside world, everything is still under control. I hope that when you leave here, you will see a real new world. Chapter 764. Li Tianlan took a deep look at military counselor and suddenly asked, "How long do you want me to stay here?" Military counselor paused and laughed. "To be precise, Your Highness, how long do you want to stay here?" Li Tianlan tapped the table with his fingers and didn't answer. Military counselor wanted him to stay here. Li Tianlan himself didn't want to leave now. Although their reasons were different, they didn't conflict with each other. Instead, they were logical. Li Tianlan wanted to stay here to become stronger. Military counselor hoped that he could take back what the master of Samsara Palace had asked him to temporarily take charge of after he became stronger. The core was to become stronger. Li Tianlan looked down at the list with sharp eyes, as if he were looking at a real saber. He confirmed his thoughts again. He didn't like the extremely loose alliance model of saber. It could even be said that he didn't approve of it. The so-called disapproval was not about the alliance model. It was about the looseness. He didn't like any organization with a loose structure, even if it was more hidden, and could play a miraculous role sometimes. But if it was too loose, it meant too much uncontrollable risk. He clenched his fists subconsciously. What he could grasp must be the power that he could hold firmly in his hands. When can you really enter the invincible realm? Military counselor asked calmly. I know what you mean. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He didn't ask whether Saber's allies had the possibility of merging with the giant group in the future, nor did he ask about the specific position of those allies. The current situation was that the giant group was constantly losing blood, shrinking in size and decreasing in strength. But because of the existence of these allies, the overall strength of the giant group didn't decline. In the recent personnel changes in Zhongzhou State, the voices of opposition appeared at the top of other groups, which was undoubtedly the influence of the allies. But military counselor didn't know what they would do in the future, and those allies themselves might not have a clear attitude and idea. Everyone was looking forward to Li Tianlan's achievements. Li Tianlan's growth was directly related to the final attitude of these allies. Pure force didn't seem to be of much use, but at least Li Tianlan didn't think it was useless. There were too many examples in history where individual bravery couldn't achieve anything. But in Li Tianlan's eyes, this didn't mean anything. It only meant that martial artists who couldn't achieve anything were still not strong enough. When a person had the power but was unable to destroy the entire world, his actions were reckless. He did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, and he was a bore. But when a person's power truly stood at the pinnacle and could sweep away everything, he was God. The chosen one had no schemes. One strike was enough. The distance between a boorish man and a god was the distance between sufficient strength and absolute strength. In the eyes of those allies, if Li Tianlan had reached the peak now, the Emperor Dong's palace, with the help of the chosen one, would expand without limit, occupy endless resources, and rule the dark world. The strength of an individual could make his absolute will unimpeded in the dark world, and his power would also be powerful on the world stage. Such a person and power were absolutely worthy of any ally's support. And if Li Tianlan stopped moving forward, his current combat capability was also at the top level in the dark world. But if it was limited to this, his allies would only gradually drift away from him. At least for now, Li Tianlan's personal advance and retreat meant too many things. Li Tianlan's combat capability had been growing, but he had never broken through to become a real invincible realm expert, which had made his allies hesitate. So the only thing Li Tianlan needed to do now was to improve his strength. It was meaningless for him to leave the desert prison, except for the chores. Military counselor and Saint could handle the ordinary chores. Military counselor was stunned for a moment and then said softly, "At present, the situation outside is relatively deadlocked. Both the Southeast Group and the Giant Group are waiting for a big shuffle. Although we are cooperating, there are some things that we don't know. After summer solstice visited Li Huaqing's attitude changed subtly. I guess the two sides have probably reached an agreement, so now both sides are fighting to control the shuffle. Moreover, the two groups will also trade some positions. Your Highness, to tell you the truth, you are not very good at this kind of thing, which is why I suggest you stay in the desert. If nothing unexpected happens, the new balance will probably be reached in more than a year. That is also the most suitable time for you to leave the desert. 1 year later, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, Succession? Yes, at present, whether Li Huaqing can stay or not is very important. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and said softly, If Li Huaqing retires, Wang Qinglei has the best chance. According to the usual practice, in the adjustment a few years ago, Wang Qinglei should have become a director. At that time, the palace master was very hostile to the Wang family of Beihai. We exerted some influence, but Wang Qinglei didn't go up. Now looking back, Wang Tianzong should have also noticed something at that time, so he secretly operated some things, causing Wang Qinglei to stay in Wuxia. In this way, even if Li Huaqing retires, although Wang Qinglei still has a chance, he is no longer popular. The new president is probably a transitional figure. For us, Li Huaqing staying in office is the most favorable situation. But what Li Huaqing wants is Beihai. Li Tianlan stood up and walked back and forth. You mean when summer solstice visited Li Huaqing, she offered to support him to be re-elected, so that he would give up his suppression of Beihai? He shook his head. If he takes Beihai, he will have great merits and be famous in history. It is unlikely that he will accept it. Not everyone is as sharp as your Highness, military counselor said softly. Taking Beihai is a big goal. It's the same as unifying the world. The goal is there, but not many people expect to achieve it in a short time. In fact, if you want to take back the dominance of Beihai, it has to be done little by little. Zhongzhou state doesn't allow Beihai to split, but Wang Shengxiao has given his bottom line. So this game is a real tug-of-war. There can't be any results in a few years. Maybe it will be a game of decades or even hundreds of years. In fact, they have gotten enough in the past year. I think they will stop temporarily when they reach a predetermined goal, and make plans slowly. After all, for more than a year, Beihai's conscription has not stopped. Nearly 200,000 veterans of the Beihai Corps have rejoined the army. At the same time, the Beihai Corps has recruited nearly 400,000 new soldiers. Now the entire Beihai Corps has more people than the Border Control Corps. Once an army of nearly 800,000 gets out of control. Hey, so you think that when he reaches a certain goal, Li Huaqing will take the initiative to compromise and take the olive branch extended by summer solstice? Although this is cooperation, it is essentially a threat. Li Tianlan said seriously. It's not a compromise. Politics is not a war, let alone a bottomless struggle. It's an art. Tianlan, you must remember this. There is the most delicate balance in the world here. Wang Shengxiao intimidated Zhongzhou state with a tough stance that he would not hesitate to fight. The next step is to compromise, advance and retreat. Zhongzhou state is indeed stronger than Beihai, but it is impossible for Zhongzhou state to retreat step by step. In fact, after being strong, Zhongzhou state also has to selectively make concessions. The parliament made a strong move this time. And when it reaches a certain point, it is bound to stop. You can't think of it as bowing down. It can be said to be a change of strategy. A voice rang out at the door. Dongqing Wudi, who was wearing a marshal's military uniform, walked in and said meaningfully, "Those who can sit in high positions can't do everything without a purpose. Being strong or compromising is a way to achieve a goal." They made a strong move and encountered a problem after achieving their goal. Next, they must change their method and plot another goal. Minister. Li Tianlan nodded. So Li Huaqing will agree to summer solstice. The academics has not been in an ideal state in the past 10 years of adjustment. Once Li Huaqing retires, he is bound to be squeezed by other groups. It is very important for him to be re-elected. 5 years is enough for him to make arrangements for the academics again, so he will agree to at least some of summer solstice's conditions. He needs to use this time to win over some people to make up for the shortcomings in the political structure of the academics. Dongqing Wudi said quietly. Military counselor's eyes lit up, and a smile flashed across the corner of his mouth. Dongqing Wudi's statement coincided with his thoughts. Minister, you mean that thing is settled? Military counselor asked with a smile. Although he had great influence in Zhongzhou state, he was not a high-level official after all. So when they were alone, it was not appropriate to say something. Now that Li Tianlan was here, the meaning was different. Most likely. Dongqing Wudi hesitated for a moment and said slowly. The President and the Prime Minister asked me to communicate this issue. I don't understand. Li Tianlan said directly. It was a question, but it was also learning. He was really not good at the twists and turns in the so-called art. Military counselor asked about the candidate for the director of the Southeast Group after a year. Dongqing Wudi said softly. Settled? Li Tianlan thought of the competition between Yi Dongsheng and Wang Qinglei. It's hard to say at the moment, but the current situation. Yi Dongsheng and Wang Qinglei should become directors of Zhongzhou State at the same time. This is also the result that the Southeast Group can reluctantly accept. Yi Dongsheng, Wang Qinglei. There was no Wen Siyuan. No matter how slowly Tianlan was, he knew what it meant. It meant that for the first time in hundreds of years, the Speaker of Beihai did not enter the council. Is this summer solstice's compromise? The Southeast Group would rather give up Wen Siyuan and let Wang Qinglei go? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. It's not the Southeast Group that is unwilling to give up Wang Qinglei. Military counselor smiled. It's the academics and the Prince Group that are unwilling to give up. Although Wang Qinglei is still the leader of the Southeast Group in name, in fact he has completely fallen out with Xie Ji. Letting him go up is tantamount to occupying a place that belongs to the Southeast Group, but he will not contribute to the development of the Southeast Group, which will greatly weaken the influence of the Southeast Group. Although Wen Siyuan can't go up, he will stay. He is still young, so he may have a chance in the future. Moreover, he has a high prestige in Beihai. When the Southeast Group reshuffles, it really needs Wen Siyuan to stay in Beihai to stabilize the army's morale. Wang Qinglei is very ambitious about Li Huaqing's position. After losing the support of the Southeast Group, he is bound to seek new forces. The academics is the most suitable target. He comes from the Wang family of Beihai and has a good relationship with some retired but influential old comrades. The academics very much hopes to unite these forces through him and make up for their shortcomings. Li Tianlan finally understood. So this is the change of strategy? After Wang Shengxiao showed his determination, the academics and the Prince Group have already understood that it is impossible to forcibly oppress him, so they plan to disintegrate the Wang family of Beihai from within? Wang Qinglei is a very important chess piece. As long as they win him over, they can fully support Wang Qinglei and push him to the position of Li Huaqing 6 years later. At that time, they will plot for the position of patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. In this way, to a large extent, Zhongzhou state will take back the dominance of Beihai? That's about it. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Dongqing Wudi's mouth. But the details still need a lot of deals. The academics can't push Wang Qinglei without conditions. So the right way is to let him fight for the position of patriarch first. At least, he should have as much influence as summer solstice in the Wang family of Beihai. As a condition for supporting him, the speaker of Beihai province must be replaced by someone from the academics. It happens that Wen Siyuan should be facing retirement or becoming a director at that time, and this position will be vacant. In addition, the commander of the Beihai Corps will also be replaced. This may become a goal that we, including ourselves, will strive for at that time. We destroy groups but never target individuals. This is Li Huaqing's specialty and the key strategy that enabled the academics to get to where they are today. It is still effective to use it on Beihai province. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. For a moment, he couldn't even figure out how complicated the calculation was. He only felt that it was even more complicated than his swordsmanship. It's ridiculous. He took a deep breath and muttered to himself. This is a trap. It's impossible for summer solstice not to see it. How could she agree to this kind of thing? This method? He thought about it seriously and said slowly. It's just like fighting for a few years of breathing time. What's the point? Who knows what Wang Tianzong's state will be like a few years later? Military counselor said blandly. She's delaying and putting her hope on Wang Tianzong's recovery. As long as his injury recovers, everything will turn around. After his injury recovers, Wang Tianzong will be the heavenly son of the age. Is she so sure that Wang Tianzong's injury can recover? Li Tianlan didn't think so. She has no way. Dongcheng Wudi said. She can't see the way forward for the time being, so she can only delay it. This is the price she must pay, or a compromise. Li Tianlan was silent. Wuyue province, half of Huating, a considerable part of the Southeast Group's power, and a director's quota. This price could be said to be extremely heavy. Li Tianlan suddenly thought of a very important question. If Li Huaqing stays to help us complete the shuffle with the Southeast Group, then after he stays, if he stays, there won't be too many problems in the shuffle of the giant group. At that time I will focus my resources on you. Li Tianlan's eyes flashed. Then at that time, the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast Group. It has nothing to do with us. Dongcheng Wudi said flatly. His expression was very quiet, but there was a kind of resolute coldness and decisiveness in his words. Our biggest demand to cooperate with the Southeast Group is to smoothly complete the shuffle, that's all. Dongcheng Wudi said. Li Tianlan opened his mouth. At this moment he vaguely seemed to understand what politics was. The parliament of Zhongzhou State seemed to take a step back and only delayed the time for a few years, but it lacked the tricky opponent of the giant group. After the shuffle of the giant group, the group with Li Tianlan as the core was bound to be strengthened and absorb new blood. At that time, the giant group was also likely to become a member of the Southeast Group. So after the shuffle, we'll turn around and deal with the Southeast Group? Li Tianlan's voice was a little complicated. He didn't have a good impression of the Southeast Group, but this kind of relationship, which was close cooperation one moment and fierce in the next, still made him feel a little uncomfortable. This kind of discomfort had nothing to do with the Southeast Group. It had something to do with politics. Dongcheng Wudi said it was art. But such art really didn't allow any sensibility. This was an art that was rational to the point of cruelty. After the shuffle, we need a period of time to integrate and connect with the power of military counselor, so as to restore our strength. Of course, all this depends on your state at that time. If everything goes well. Dongcheng Wudi looked at Li Tianlan. At that time, I should also retire. You should not ask me about Zhongzhou State at that time. You should ask yourself, because at that time, you led the giant group to play in the parliament. How to deal with the Southeast Group was all up to you. At that time, I should also retire. Military counselor chuckled and said, Your Highness, at that time it will be your stage. Chapter 765. Li Tianlan understood what Dongcheng Wudi and military counselor meant. No one solved everything for Li Tianlan, including the master of Samsara Palace. All they did was try their best to create the most favorable environment for him. If everything went well, Li Tianlan's future fate, the fate of Emperor Dong's palace, the fate of the Wang family of Beihai, the fate of many people, enemies and friends, all depended on how he chose. And the most important thing was the next year. 1 year. Military counselor hoped that he would officially enter the invincible realm. All the people who had expectations for him hoped that he would enter the invincible realm a year later. During the 2 years in the desert, he cultivated his mind and restrained his sharpness. Everyone was looking forward to the moment when he really soared into the sky. Because he was the heavenly son of the age, no one thought that such expectations were unreasonable. Even military counselor forgot that even after a year, Li Tianlan was only 24 years old. What people were looking forward to now was a 24-year-old invincible realm expert. If he could do this, he could even be said to be the youngest invincible realm expert in hundreds of years since the emergence of the invincible realm experts. That was a well-deserved miracle. Li Tianlan lowered his head and was silent for a long time before whispering to himself, 1 year. Dongcheng Wudi and military counselor looked at him with concern. Dongcheng Wudi moved the corner of his mouth, shook his head and laughed. It's really difficult, Tianlan. There's no need to embarrass yourself. I've never heard of such a young Invincible Realm expert. You will enter the Invincible Realm sooner or later. It's not a big problem. He paused and continued. There's no need to worry about this year. In fact, if Li Huaqing can be re-elected, we still have 6 years. Before he retires, you can enter the Invincible Realm, which is in line with expectations. 6 years. This year, Li Tianlan was 23 years old. 6 years later, he was 29 years old. At the age of nearly 30, all aspects of his body had reached the real peak. There was no problem for him to enter the Invincible Realm. No matter how much people doubted Li Tianlan's potential, no one believed that Li Tianlan needed to enter the Invincible Realm until he was 30 years old because of his combat capability. An Invincible Realm expert who was nearly 30 years old still had the hope of entering the peak. This time was undoubtedly the most reasonable. Li Tianlan shook his head. It's not a difficult problem. Invincible Realm. What is Invincible Realm? There were Invincible Realm experts and Invincible Realm experts in the Dark World. This unclear but real division was enough to explain a lot of problems. The so-called combat capability of the Invincible Realm could already show that he was not weaker than ordinary Invincible Realm experts in terms of combat. But this word often represented an upper limit. He had never entered the upper limit of the Invincible Realm. In theory, a person's talent was limited. In theory, reaching the combat capability of the Invincible Realm was his end. For some talented people, the Invincible Realm was just the beginning. The most important thing in the Invincible Realm was the domain. Li Tianlan's martial arts were mainly based on the sword, and the most important were the sword energy and sword intent. This kind of path was completely different from the domain, but the meaning was almost the same. This was because sword chi and sword intent could both form a domain. To some extent, the domain of the Invincible Realm represented perfection. For any Invincible Realm expert, the domain was the best weapon and the strongest defense. Now if Li Tianlan didn't have the dragon vein, his combat capability wouldn't be weak. But compared with the real Invincible Realm experts, his physical strength, resistance, and endurance in fierce battles were worse. Only his lethality was comparable to that of the Invincible Realm experts. In other words, the combat capability of the Invincible Realm didn't represent perfection. Li Tianlan's achievements today were largely due to the strong vitality of the dragon vein, which made up for his shortcomings to a certain extent. If there was an example, Dijiang Saint and Wang Xiaoyao were the best examples. They were all in the Invincible Realm now. In their current state, even in their heyday, they wouldn't be Li Tianlan's opponents, because they had just entered the Invincible Realm, and their realm was not stable, which meant that their mastery of their own domain was not perfect. But if they completely stabilized their realm, Dijiang's double thunder veins would be fully exerted, and this process might last for a long time. Many experts who had just entered the Invincible Realm were trapped at this step, such as those who were at the bottom of the holy list. But once people like Dijiang stabilized their realm, their combat capability would soar exponentially, and they could even rise to the level close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, or even directly enter the peak of the Invincible Realm. At that time, Li Tianlan naturally couldn't be Dijiang's opponent. Li Tianlan now had his own path. But for every Invincible Realm expert, the domain represented perfection. The domain of every Invincible Realm expert was their own path. The domain of an Invincible Realm expert was like a world they controlled themselves. Within the scope of the domain, their speed, strength, and defense were greatly improved. The process of perfecting their own domain was the process of the Invincible Realm expert's continuous breakthrough. The same was true of swordsmanship. When one exerted his domain and swordsmanship to the extreme, he was the so-called peak of the Invincible Realm expert. But this was the biggest problem for Li Tianlan, because his current condition was too perfect. It was too perfect, so it formed a flaw. His strength, speed, willpower, and sword intent were all so outstanding that he couldn't find a way to mix them together to form his own for the time being. The possibility of swordsmanship or domain. This was also the key to his failure to break through. If he couldn't solve this problem, it would be difficult for him to touch the threshold of the Invincible Realm, and he would only be left further and further behind by his former defeated opponents. But at the same time, because all his conditions were too perfect. Once he really combined them together, he didn't even need to stabilize his realm, and his combat capability could directly soar to an incredible level. Because ordinary invincible realm experts needed to perfect their domains after breaking through. Their domains were the most perfect relative to their state before breaking through. But after entering the invincible realm, they had flaws, and they needed to keep improving and exploring. And Li Tianlan, he didn't need to stabilize his realm, because he was perfect now. Once he entered the invincible realm, his domain would be truly perfect. In other words, as long as he could successfully break through, he didn't need to do anything excessive, and he would be at the peak of the invincible realm. This kind of reversal of order in martial arts meant too many things. It could be said to be the potential to reach the peak in the future. But at least for now, it seemed to be a problem for Li Tianlan. To enter the invincible realm within a year. No, almost. It was completely impossible. He shook his head and suddenly asked, "How is Rushi now?" Dongqing Wudi's expression stiffened for a moment. Then he shook his head and whispered, "She's still in a coma. I go to see her every once in a while. Rushi is now in Xianyuan City. Naylan Shurying has been working in Tiannan, and Beihai has helped Xianyuan City build a biological laboratory. At present, Rushi is sleeping in the hibernation chamber, and the result is hard to say." Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and whispered. Then, he hesitated a little but finally asked, "What about Yue Tong?" "No news." Military counselor touched his nose with a bitter smile. "There was no news of her after she left Mount Dibbing last year. No one knows where she is now. My people have been looking for her, but there is no clue yet. If she wants to hide herself, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to find her." Li Tianlan smiled, and his expression was a little complicated. He looked at military counselor, narrowed his eyes, and finally did not continue to speak. "Your Highness, what do you want to ask?" Military counselor took the initiative to speak. He asked Dongqing Rushi and Wang Yuetong. "And then? Where's Little Bai?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at military counselor. "Why is she hiding from me?" Military counselor opened his mouth and was speechless for a moment. "Wow, I've been in a bad state these days. This chapter is a little short. This ahem, well, that it's snowing today, and it's so heavy. I don't know why I said this. I just want to say something. Maybe I feel guilty because I didn't write enough?" Chapter 766. Military counselor did not answer Li Tianlan's question, nor could he. In fact, Li Tianlan had been in the desert for a year, but Qin Weibai had left Zhongzhou state. It was said that she had gone to Switzerland. This news had aroused all kinds of speculation in some small circles in Zhongzhou state. Both sides were not nameless pawns. Dongqing Wudi could come to the desert prison, Bai Qingqian could come, and so could military counselor. With Qin Weibai's power, if she wanted to go to the desert prison, there would be no difficulty. Xiao Mohai, who completely regarded Li Tianlan as his ancestor, naturally did not dare to disobey the mistress. Under such circumstances, Qin Weibai was far away from Zhongzhou state, which made people speculate about other possibilities. It was inconsistent with his deep feelings. Many people felt that this matter was a little interesting. Li Tianlan glanced at him, and did not continue to ask. He said casually, "Have you eaten? Eat something together? Yesterday a new batch of seafood arrived here. The chef's skills are passable. I know you can't stand being wronged here, eating delicacies every day." Dongqing Wudi said with a smile and shook his head slightly. The annual maintenance fee allocated by Zhongzhou state to the desert prison was just over 20 million yuan, which was a veritable public fund. Xiao Mohai took nearly a quarter of this money, and used it as Li Tianlan's food expenses. Since Li Tianlan entered the desert prison, Xiao Mohai had hired more than 10 chefs who were proficient in different cuisines. Countless expensive ingredients, tobacco and alcohol were basically transported by air. A fighter jet near the prison was now responsible for this work. Xiao Mohai informed the nearest military region of the ingredients he needed, and then sent a fighter jet to the military region to fetch them. He was blatant and undisguised. The army headquarters and even the parliament had discussed the issue of Xiao Mohai's misuse of funds. More than one counselor even proposed to take Xiao Mohai down, and let him go to Zhongzhou State for a talk. Xiao Mohai didn't care at all. He was clinging to Li Tianlan. The result of this was obvious. Xiao Mohai really didn't move. No matter how many attacks he suffered, no one could shake his position. Let's go for a drink. Li Tianlan smiled. Dongqing Wudi hesitated, sighed slightly, shook his head, and said, "Forget it. I have to go to the Beijiang military region. There is a meeting in the army headquarters in the evening. Time is tight. Maybe next time." Li Tianlan was slightly startled. He nodded and said, "All right. Then I'll go back too." The military counselor stood up. The three of them walked out of the prison gate. "Do you have any clues about the North Sea attackers?" Li Tianlan asked suddenly. Li Tianlan was naturally curious about the mysterious chosen one who really stood at the end of martial arts. "No." Dongqing Wudi shook his head. "It's like he disappeared completely. All the signs show that this person doesn't exist." He suddenly smiled and said, "This has almost become an unsolved mystery. It's also because of him that the dark world has been quiet during this period of time. Not to mention waves, not even a wave. Everyone is afraid to be the first bird to stand out and be killed by him. But since that day, there has been no news from him." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He did have some doubts about that mysterious genius, but at the same time, he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Every time he watched that video, he felt a sense of familiarity. Li Tianlan shook his head. In silence, the gate of the desert prison slowly opened, and the three of them were already surrounded by yellow sand. "Minister, take care." Li Tianlan stretched out his hand, his expression calm and serious. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at him, shook hands with him, and turned to board the plane. The rotors of the helicopter whistled, driving the sand all over the sky, and flew higher and higher. Li Tianlan raised his head and watched quietly. The flying sand was bounced away by his sword energy, and fell on the original terrain. It became a khaki tornado. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, quiet like a glimmer of light under the scorching sun in the desert. Xiao Mohai came over and asked cautiously, "Your Highness, what do you want for lunch?" "Serve the third dish." Li Tianlan turned around and walked into the prison. Xiao Mohai nodded. Li Tianlan had a special menu in the prison, which was divided into 6 types, from 1 to 6. There were 6 fixed dishes on each menu, and the other 2 could be matched at will. Menu number 3 was the dish of tianfu, with plenty of chili. Li Tianlan usually ate most of the dishes in menu number 3. The two walked back to the prison. Along the fine cracks all over the prison, he looked at the gate of the maze that really belonged to the scope. Li Tianlan thought for a moment and walked over. The prison guard had already opened the door with a respectful face. "You don't have to follow me," Li Tianlan said. "Go prepare the food and open a bottle of wine." Xiao Mohai nodded and wrote it down. He said softly, "Maotai or Wuliangya? Or red wine?" "Give me some of both," Li Tianlan said. Xiao Mohai nodded and turned to the kitchen. The narrow corridor of the prison was lit with faint lights that could confuse people's perception. Li Tianlan walked silently in the maze until he reached the enemy near the core area. What appeared in front of him was a narrow door. It was quiet inside the door. Li Tianlan waved his hand to call a prison guard and said lightly, "Open the door." This was not in line with the rules, but the prison guard did not talk nonsense. After entering the complicated password, he opened the prison door. With a slight sound, a simple room appeared in front of Li Tianlan. It was an ordinary single bed with a thick mattress that looked very comfortable. An old cup was casually thrown on the bed. There was a desk and a chair in the space of about 10 square meters. There was a lamp on the desk. The toilet was in the corner, and there were some books on a small cabinet facing the toilet. A white-haired old man, who looked to be in his 60s or 70s and wearing presbyopic glasses, was sitting at the desk and reading with the help of the faint light from the small window. Hearing the sound, he turned his head and looked at Li Tianlan with some doubts. "New cellmate." The old man stood up and frowned. "There should be single rooms here." He suddenly narrowed his eyes and said in a cold voice, "So, I'm going to be executed. Make room for the newcomer?" Prisoners are rarely executed in the desert prison. It can be said that there is no death penalty here. Li Tianlan said lightly. It's not that there is no death penalty, but that there is no need. The old man looked at Li Tianlan for a while and laughed. Everyone who stays here is living a life worse than death. You look like you're quite relaxed. Li Tianlan said as he looked at the surroundings. What else can I do? The old man said quietly. He looked at the prison door that was still open, and then looked at Li Tianlan, seeming to find that Li Tianlan was dressed completely differently from the prisoners. You are? The old man was a little confused. Prison guard? Not quite. Prison management? It was even more unlikely. He was too young. Was he here to accompany the big shots of the army headquarters to inspect the work? But why did he come to contact him alone? From the standpoint of the prison, I can be regarded as your cellmate, Li Tianlan said. But I live outside. Outside? The old man's eyes flickered and he tentatively said, What if I stand in another standpoint? Li Tianlan turned around and said calmly, From another standpoint, I am your god. The old man suddenly raised his eyebrows. His eyes instantly became incomparably sharp. God? He asked. It was not a rhetorical question, but a question. Who do you think you are? Your Highness. Xiao Mahai's voice appeared at the door, interrupting the old man's sneer. I just received a notice from the parliament. Deputy Prime Minister Hua Zhengyang, a member of the parliament, will come to the desert prison in a few days. He hopes to talk to you face to face, Li Tianlan said. Arrange a time. Okay. Xiao Mahai nodded, looked at the old man in surprise, and turned to leave. The old man's figure stiffened for a moment. He looked at the direction of Xiao Mahai's departure, and thought about the conversation between them just now. Zhongzhou State member? Deputy Prime Minister Hua Zhengyang? Even if he didn't know who the current members of Zhongzhou State were, at least he knew Xiao Mahai, the warden. He raised his head stiffly and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at him, expressionless. Okay, God. The old man smiled bitterly. What do you want me to do? I want to learn. Li Tianlan walked out of the prison and waved his hand. Let's have dinner together. The old man followed Li Tianlan quietly. What do you want to learn? How to be a successful leader? Li Tianlan asked. The old man froze and looked up at Li Tianlan. Success. Success. He said it silently for a while, and then laughed at himself. Do you know what you're asking? Are you asking a loser for advice on the experience of success? Just because you've failed, when you're closest to success. Li Tianlan said meaningfully. So I'm sure you can teach me a lot. The old man followed Li Tianlan with a blank face, and his eyes were in a trance. Li Tianlan stopped talking. He just quietly observed the old man, keeping his composure. Zhou Tong. This was a name that many people in Zhongzhou State had forgotten. This name might appear in history books as a negative teaching material for many years to come. But over the years, this name had completely disappeared in Zhongzhou State. But if time went back, more than a decade ago, this was one of the most powerful names in Zhongzhou State. He was a former member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State, and the Speaker of Tianfu Province. If one were to be exact, in those days he was the main competitor of Li Huaqing, the current president of Zhongzhou State. What they fought for was not the position of president, but the position of crown prince. At that time, the academics was not as big as it was now, and Li Huaqing had almost no chance of winning. Everyone thought that Zhou Tong would reach the top. But just a month before the dust settled, when Zhou Tong's voice completely overwhelmed Li Huaqing's, when Zhou Tong was the closest to success, he came to the desert prison. That was the largest conflict between the academics and the prince group. At that time, Zhou Tong was one of the most important leaders of the prince group. If he hadn't competed so fiercely with Li Huaqing and had taken a step back, the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State would basically have nothing to do with Qin Fangqing today. Even today, some of Zhou Tong's old subordinates and confidants promoted by him were still active in the prince group. And his son was now the deputy speaker of the Southwest Affairs, enjoying the treatment of the governor. Although he was not as dazzling as Zhou Yuanshan because of Zhou Tong, he was almost recognized as the successor of the big group within the prince group. Military counselor had already taken action in the outside world. So during this year in the desert prison, Li Tianlan naturally would not be idle. Chapter 767. Switzerland, Forgotten City. In the luxurious and exquisite office, a person in charge of the Lin clan's branch, who could summon wind and rain in the outside world, carefully retreated from the office with a respectful smile. Horsewoman stood at the door, looking at him silently and expressionlessly. The man, who looked over 50 years old, shook hands with Horsewoman with a warm smile, exchanged feelings, and then left contentedly. It was 9 o'clock in the evening in Switzerland. It was quiet in Forgotten City. Horsewoman looked at her watch, took out her mobile phone, and checked the schedule. After confirming that the boss would not receive other guests today, and that there was nothing else to deal with, she turned and walked into the office. Qin Weibai, dressed in a moon-white cheongsam, was sitting behind the desk, dealing with documents. She still had an exquisite and perfect face, but at this moment, her whole aura seemed to be changing silently. It was not a kind of maturity after experiencing wind and rain, but a kind of change from calmness to sharpness. She quietly flipped through the documents in her hand, with a calm and serious face. Her every move was with indescribable rationality and magnanimity. This picture was beautiful, but this aura was so strong that Horsewoman subconsciously ignored her appearance and gender. Every time this happened, Horsewoman would think of the master of Samsara Palace. Facing the current Qin Weibai was more and more similar to facing the former master of Samsara Palace. For half a year, Qin Weibai sat in the position of the patriarch of the Lin clan. Horsewoman witnessed with her own eyes that she was becoming more and more powerful. She did not have world-shaking force, but she had established enough prestige in the branch system of the Lin clan in the shortest time. This half a year was busy and fulfilling. Qin Weibai completely squeezed into the core of the Lin clan bit by bit, and became a veritable patriarch of the Lin clan. A month ago, Lin Fengting, who had stayed in Forgotten City for nearly half a year, took his luggage and went on a trip, which was enough to show that he was completely relieved about the situation of the Lin clan. South America has been very lively recently. Hearing the footsteps, Qin Weibai looked up at Horsewoman and said softly. Horsewoman was stunned and thought of the head of the branch who had just left. Lin Buzheng. According to the genealogical records of the Lin clan, this branch had left the headquarters for nearly 200 years, and had been developing in South America. Lin Buzheng was already the 6th generation in charge of this branch. The Lin clan of South America was not considered the top wealthy family in the entire South American circle, but it had been firmly in the front line for many years. It was relatively influential in the top circle, and involved in more complicated fields. Some information flashed through Horsewoman's mind. She looked at Qin Weibai and asked, South America? Qin Weibai nodded and took a sip of water from the cup. Horsewoman was a little confused. Lin Buzheng didn't need to ask the headquarters for help in South America, did he? Even if Lin Buzheng was not the top figure in South America, he was at least close to the top of the pyramid. If it was something in South America, what on earth had he encountered that made him rush back to the headquarters to find Qin Weibai? There are some remaining questions about the Heroes Club. Qin Weibai stood up and stretched gently. Her graceful body suddenly showed a thrilling curve. She wore a cotton dress and moved her body in the office. She frowned and said, Since the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, there has been no new invincible realm expert in the Heroes Club. They have no leader, and their internal affairs have never been peaceful. This is a behemoth that dominates South America and North America. Its internal turmoil has also affected many fields in South America. The Lin family of South America has also been greatly affected. Horsewoman's eyes flickered and she did not speak for a while. This was the case. The problem was often encountered in the Lin clan. Or it could be said that it had often appeared in the past 6 months. As the patriarch of the Lin clan, there were not many things that needed to be busy under normal circumstances. But the key was that the Samsara Palace had forcibly turned the normal state of the dark world into an abnormal state. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, more than half of the invincible realm experts on the divine and holy lists had fallen. Almost all the superpowers, including the Heroes Club, the Jiang family of South America, the Men in Black, the Fantasy World, the Shadow Throne, most of the superpowers were leaderless. The whole dark world seemed calm, but the internal fighting had become more and more intense. Not only the Lin clan of South America, but almost all the branches of the Lin clan scattered all over the world were affected. Qin Weibai also took advantage of this matter to mediate and quickly established her prestige. In Horsewoman's impression, the Lin clan of South America seemed to have a problem a few months ago and was quickly solved. The Heroes Club. Is someone trying to integrate the forces of the Heroes Club? Is it the South American government or private? Horsewoman asked softly. It's the Jiang family of South America. Qin Weibai said. Horsewoman suddenly narrowed her eyes. Annexation? How can it be so easy? Qin Weibai shook her head. This is the most complicated part. What do you need me to do? Horsewoman asked directly. The Heroes Club belonged to South America and had a deep cooperative relationship with many South American governments. When they were leaderless, the South American government wanted to take the Heroes Club for its own use. Although this matter was sensitive, it was not unnegotiable. The worst result was to break up and negotiate, but they would not fight. But the Jiang family of South America was also a giant in South America. Once they annexed the Heroes Club, the two forces would unite. The Jiang family of South America would have the power to seriously threaten any country in South America, and no country would be willing to tolerate it. Once this kind of thing started, it was almost equal to a war. With the right opportunity, other forces would naturally not stand idly by. The whole South America would be in a mess. No wonder Lin Bujing hurried back to the headquarters again. Go to South America. Qin Weibai said softly. Meet Jiang Guochu in my name and talk to him. See his attitude first. If I'm not wrong, Jiang Guochu should have entered the invincible realm now. Horsewoman nodded, not surprised at all. In fact, before Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu appeared, Jiang Guochu had always been the youngest invincible realm expert in the dark world. He had been stuck at this threshold for several years. Now that he was in his early 30s, it was almost natural for him to enter the invincible realm. I'll go now, Horsewoman said softly. She paused, her eyes flashed, and she said softly, if there is a chance, should we? Let's see his attitude first and then report to me. I hope he will remember one thing. Today, the #1 expert in the dark world is still in the Lin clan. Horsewoman nodded, turned around, and left directly. Qin Weibai sat back at her desk and turned on the computer. There was a video file on the desktop that she had watched countless times. She moved the mouse and clicked on the video. In the picture, the Rolls-Royce was slowly approaching Mount Dibbing. The flawless young man got out of the car and looked at the calm Mount Dibbing with a cold expression. Qin Weibai stared blankly at the young man in the video and subconsciously touched her face. Her eyes were a little dazed and she whispered, so is this a coincidence or an accident? The phone suddenly rang. Qin Weibai was slightly shocked. She took out the mobile phone beside her and looked at the number. After hesitating for a while, she pressed the answer button. What's the matter? She asked directly in a light voice. I went to the desert prison with Dongqing Wudi today, and now I just returned to Yuzhou. Military counselor's calm voice sounded on the phone. Qin Weibai's bright eyes flickered slightly and she whispered, how is he? Very good, but also very bad. Military counselor said. Be more specific. Qin Weibai frowned. Military counselor hesitated. He subconsciously wanted to tell Qin Weibai about Li Tianlan's choice in martial arts. But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he realized that Li Tianlan was not the person he had imagined. He could not understand anything about martial arts at all. He thought about how to phrase his words. After a moment of silence, he said helplessly, you should go and see for yourself. Qin Weibai held the mobile phone in silence, and the expression on her dreamy perfect face was a little complicated. He asked me today why you were hiding from him. Military counselor smiled bitterly. I have nothing to say. Qin Weibai still did not speak, and she looked a little stubborn. Military counselor waited quietly for a long time before he said lightly, why? You obviously want to see him. What's the point of hiding in Switzerland? Who told you that I want to see him? Qin Weibai's tone was cold. You said it. You said that you are the same, and it's really the same. Since you are the same, then if you are the palace master, you must want to see him now. Military counselor said calmly. Qin Weibai paused and continued to be silent. What are you insisting on? Military counselor chuckled. Or, what are you hesitating about? I don't know. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time before she said softly. Her voice was a little hoarse. You don't know if you love him? Military counselor's tone was light without any taste. I said that we are the same. I can't describe that kind of the same as you. To be exact, this kind of essence is exactly the same. I can even let her affect my thoughts. This is not hypnosis, but a natural reaction when facing myself. I don't know if I love him or not, or I love him, but I don't know if this is the result of her influence. Qin Weibai said calmly. Excuses. Military counselor's tone was understated. You. Qin Weibai raised her eyebrows. He can affect you, and you can naturally affect him. You have been together for so long. When has the palace master ever changed her mind? The palace master hasn't changed, and you naturally won't change. So you are lying. Military counselor said slowly. What on earth don't you know? Qin Weibai took a deep breath and said softly. He said he wanted to see me? Military counselor was stunned and shook his head. No, he just asked you why you were hiding from him. He asked me why I was hiding from him. Qin Weibai laughed, and her voice was a little sad. Are you sure that the me he said is really me? Military counselor suddenly fell silent. Qin Weibai silently hung up the phone and reached out to gently cover her chest. Her heartbeat was rising and falling slowly, unusually stable, and an incomparably strong heartbeat was beating in sync with her heartbeat. But in addition, there was a third heartbeat beating slowly, extremely weak, but extremely real. Qin Weibai clenched her fists. Her face was pale, and her eyes suddenly became a little scared. Chapter 768. The night wind blew across Beihai. The lights on Mount Dibing gradually dimmed. In the quiet world, Wang Shengxiao sat on the stage of formidable person, looking at the calm Beihai and subconsciously tightened his coat. It was October. When the weather in the south was just about to cool down, Beihai had gradually become cold. There was a pot of wine beside him, and the wine had already been emptied. His face was rosy, and his somewhat hazy and drunk eyes silently looked at the moonlight reflected on the surface of the sea. He was in a daze, and no one knew what he was thinking. He had been the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai for more than half a year. After that world-shocking battle, Wang Shengxiao once again kept a low profile. He became more and more silent. He restrained all his sharpness, and the loftiness in the past seemed to have disappeared. He became more and more calm. Only the never-ending conscription in Beihai province could let people feel the power of the new patriarch of Beihai. The game with Zhongzhou state was still going on, but the compromise was done step by step. Following the North Sea Legion's compromise, a series of large-scale drills were held within the North Sea Legion. The hundreds of thousands of newly enlisted soldiers were undergoing special training every day before being thrown onto the drill field. After victory or defeat, they would undergo even more rigorous training. Beihai province seemed to be completely silent. But behind this silence, the atmosphere of the whole Beihai province became more and more iron-blooded. No one questioned Wang Shengxiao. That time, the whole Beihai saw Wang Shengxiao's attitude. Countless civilians of the North Sea province expressed sufficient support for the new patriarch. With the support of the people, the situation in Beihai gradually stabilized after many compromises. Although all of this was only temporary stability, for the North Sea province, it was an extremely rare opportunity to catch their breath. Wang Shengxiao's chin grew a short beard, and he looked more and more mature. The smile that once made people feel comfortable was less and less. His temperament gradually changed, becoming a little gloomy and more powerful. The orders from Mount Dibing had become less and less. Most of the time, Wang Shengxiao sat on the stage of formidable person. He ate, practiced, and meditated. The stage of formidable person seemed to have become his private residence. For half a year, he confined himself in the small space of the stage of formidable person. He spent every day with the stone of formidable person, and almost never left the stage of formidable person. This meant that he had never left Mount Dibing. As a result, he missed out on many important things. The phone vibrated slightly, and the screen lit up. After drinking the last sip of wine, Wang Shengxiao felt refreshed. He took the phone and connected the video call. In the video, there was a room filled with warm light. In the warm yellow light, Song Ci, who was wearing plain pajamas, had long hair. Her slightly plump face was filled with gentleness. "Have you eaten?" Looking at the dark stage of formidable person on the screen, Song Ci asked softly. "Not yet. Jing Xian is in Mount Dibing. I've made an appointment with him to eat together." Wang Shengxiao laughed. The slight wrinkles between his eyebrows subconsciously relaxed, and his whole body relaxed. "It's so late. Why haven't you gone to bed?" "Your son woke up. It took me a long time to coax him to sleep, but I'm not sleepy anymore." Song Ci held the phone and moved the camera. A newborn baby appeared on the screen. He had a small body and a small face. His mouth was covered and he was sleeping soundly. Wang Shengxiao's eyes were calm, but there was a touch of doting and guilt deep in his eyes. This was his and Song Ci's child. A few months ago, when the child was born, he didn't leave Mount Dibing, so he didn't see the birth with his own eyes. Since the child was born, he hadn't even seen his father in the video. Wang Shengxiao's mouth moved, and he didn't know what to say for a while. The camera turned. Song Ci glanced at Wang Shengxiao and said with a faint smile, "What? Are you afraid that Haotian will blame you for being a bad father?" Their child was named Wang Haotian, and his nickname was Tutu. It was the name that Wang Shengxiao and Song Ci decided before the child was born. Wang Shengxiao sighed softly, feeling a little lost. "Don't worry. When he's older, I'll tell him that he has the best father who loves him the most," Song Ci said softly. "It won't take that long." Wang Shengxiao smiled and said softly, "When the situation stabilizes, I'll take you home." "Okay." Song Ci nodded. She stared at Wang Shengxiao's face quietly and became silent. "What's wrong?" Wang Shengxiao touched his face. "Nothing." Song Ci shook her head and said softly, "I just miss you." Wang Shengxiao stopped talking and looked at the screen quietly. There were thousands of words to say, but it seemed that everything was in silence. In the slight sound of footsteps, Wang Jingxin came over with a food box. Seeing this scene, he paused and said with a smile, "I'll come back later." "No need." Wang Shengxiao smiled and hung up the video. He glanced at Wang Jingxin and asked, "How's your wife and child?" "Very good. She asked me to thank you. She's very comfortable living here during this time." Wang Jingxin smiled. Her child was already in primary school. His wife was originally a middle-level cadre of the Lin and Trade Union, which was purely an idle job. Half a year ago, the situation in Jiangzhou suddenly changed. After Wang Jingxin was transferred to Jianghuai as the governor, he placed his wife and child in Mount Dibing. In terms of the political climate in Jianghuai, Mount Dibing was undoubtedly the best. "We're a family. Don't be so polite." Wang Shengxiao shook his head, thought for a while and said softly, "How's the situation in Jianghuai?" "Very good." Wang Jingxin opened the food box, took out some side dishes, and took out a pot of wine. "Don't worry, there won't be any problems." Wang Shengxiao nodded, picked up the wine glass and took a sip. He had no doubt about Wang Jingxin's ability. In fact, Wang Jingxin's situation when he first arrived in Jianghuai was not good. In half a year, he had completely established his foothold, and his performance had also been unanimously recognized by some big shots of the Southeast Group. In the case that Wang Qinglei was already out of control, facing his wild ambition, the Southeast Group could only put more hope on Wang Jingxin, and his performance made everyone very satisfied. "How's Haotian? The little guys are very cute. When are you going to let them come back?" Wang Jingxin asked with a smile. "Now is not the time. We'll see the specific situation in a year." Wang Shengxiao frowned. "Chairman Wan." Wang Jingxin hesitated for a brief moment. He wanted to speak but stopped himself. In fact, the reason why he came back this time was mainly to ask about Wen Siyuan's advancement and retreat a year later. This was undoubtedly the most crucial adjustment. Wen Siyuan could take a step forward, stay at the same spot, or retreat. Furthermore, there were 3 outcomes, and any one of them could turn into a good or bad news. Wang Jingxin wanted a clear outcome, and this also concerned whether his methods in Jianghuai were firm or gentle. "It's hard to say." Wang Shengxiao shook his head. Whether Li Huaqing stayed or not, and when Siyuan's advancement and retreat could be said to be the most concerned issues in the next session. Many things had already begun to operate, and Wang Shengxiao could grasp the process and steps in detail. But for now, the result was still not clear enough, and could even be said to be confusing. Let's see if we can stop Wang Qinglei. Wang Shengxiao said softly. If we can stop him, everything will be fine. If we can't, the specific results may only be known at the end. Jianghuai is not a big problem, Wang Jingxin said calmly. Jianghuai was a province deeply affected by Wuxia. Wang Jingxin could control the situation in Jianghuai and could play a great role, but he could not play a decisive role. Just do your best, Wang Qinglei said softly. He calculated the time and suddenly smiled. Don't worry, it's okay. At least there shouldn't be the worst result. Wang Jingxin silently took a sip of wine and did not speak. The so-called worst result was naturally the change of the chairman of Beihai province. If that day really came, it meant that the entire Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai would face a critical moment of life and death. Wang Shengxiao said that such a result would not happen. Where did his confidence come from? Wang Shengxiao did not explain anything. He just held the wine glass and quietly looked at the calm Beihai in front of him. His eyes fell on a certain point on the sea level, and he was silent for a long time. Chapter 769. Wang Jingxin was not relieved. In the dim light of the sea, he looked at the calm Wang Shengxiao and felt more and more uneasy. Do we still have trump cards? He asked softly. After a pause he continued. I'm not talking about those troops. Yes. Wang Shengxiao laughed softly. Where are they? Wang Jingxin stared at his profile and said in a low voice. Wang Shengxiao was silent for a while and said slowly, Tiannan. Wang Jingxin took a deep breath and muttered to himself, Tiannan. The current situation in Tiannan was very calm. At least on the surface it was calm. The Freedom Corps guarded Ningbian, strictly trained, and served as the new gateway to the southern border of Zhongzhou state. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, the large amount of benefits Li Tianlan had gained in the 5 Eastern European countries had now turned into money. More than 30 wealthy families in Eastern Europe now had close cooperation with Li Tianlan, based in the 5 Eastern European countries. Even some of the wealthy families in Snow Country had boarded Li Tianlan's ship. Various fields in the 5 Eastern European countries had been monopolized by these wealthy families, and part of the business of Zhongzhou state had also started cooperation with these wealthy families. There was no doubt that whether they wanted to get involved in the 5 Eastern European countries or cooperate with Zhongzhou state, they needed Li Tianlan's approval. Because of this, Li Tianlan had obtained a large number of industrial shares of dozens of wealthy families. After a year, these shares had turned into almost astronomical dividends, and a large number of dividends were invested in the construction of Xianyuan City. In addition, a large number of funds and venture capital inside Zhongzhou state had poured into Xianyuan City. This small city, which used to be called Tunan, was shabby and desolate. It was even worse than some of the more developed towns in Zhongzhou state. With this city as the foundation, Xianyuan City was building a brand new city from beginning to end. The huge amount of work, the long urban planning, and the various industrial resources in the city were enough to make people jealous. The first investment of Huating Flourishing Age Fund had reached more than 30 billion, and this was only the first phase of investment. All the big families of the giant group were also contributing their strength. The graduates of the 2 academies recruited by Emperor Dong's palace also began to play their roles. Their combat effectiveness was improving. Among these people, some of the families they belonged to also began to migrate to Tiannan. Some refugees from several small countries near Tiannan, and even some veterans from the Golden Triangle also began to settle down in Xianyuan City. Sufficient funds and a gradually increasing population would eventually become a huge productivity. Ning Qianqing also began to become more and more mature. In just 1 year, the size of Xianyuan City had doubled. All of this meant that Xianyuan City had completely entered the normal stage. Moreover, everyone knew very well that this wasn't the fastest speed in Xianyuan City. While many people were paying attention to the desert, when Li Tianlan officially got out of prison and returned to Tiannan, all kinds of investments would probably usher in a new round of explosive growth. Once such a result appeared, at least the Flourishing Age Fund, which had never been short of money and could even treat money as waste paper, would definitely invest an amount beyond everyone's imagination in Xianyuan City. The rapid development of Xianyuan City was also the reason why the Tiannan city was calm on the surface. Calm on the surface, but it also meant that undercurrents were surging in the dark. To the south of Xianyuan City, there was already a new heaven capital. Li Guangtu hadn't recovered from his injury, and he didn't make a clear statement either. At present, he was already in a state where he was neither close to Zhongzhou State nor East Island. East Island's patience was gradually running out, while the purgatory of Heaven Capital began to slowly move to Tiannan, and the new Heaven Capital was gradually becoming stable. At the lower right of Heaven Capital was Freedom City, where all the superpowers gathered. At present, because there was no absolute ruler, this was also the most chaotic place in Tiannan. That was because this was the most chaotic place in the Tiannan region. However, even though it was the most chaotic place, the major forces still maintained a certain degree of restraint. Compared to normal times, the situation could still be considered to be stable. Further south, near the border of Annan, Burning City and Raging Fire City were also under construction. The Burning Legion constantly sent soldiers here, and they almost moved their family from Africa to here. They also received strong support from Annan. But compared with Xianyuan City, which was in full swing, the construction of the two cities occupied by the Burning Legion was obviously not satisfactory. There were 6 cities in Tiannan. While other cities were striving for stability and development, Xianyuan City was already on the road of rapid development. It had money, people and power. In the barren land of Tiannan, Xianyuan City was like a pearl. Everyone could see its existence and understand its future. Xianyuan City had limits. But Emperor Dong's palace wouldn't have limits. When Xianyuan City was established to a certain extent with the support of massive funds, the next step of Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably be expansion. The so-called expansion, whether for Heaven Capital, Freedom City, or the Burning Legion, was tantamount to invasion. Wang Xingxiao's trump card was in Tiannan. Did he want to help Emperor Dong's palace unify Tiannan, so that he could get the full support of the giant group? While he was thinking about it, he also asked the question, "Do you think it's feasible?" Wang Shengxiao looked back at him. Wang Jingxin narrowed his eyes, thought for a long time and then said in a low voice, "This is raising a tiger. Whether it's raised or not, a tiger is a tiger." Wang Shengxiao said blandly, "And if Emperor Dong's palace is a tiger, it's not our turn to raise it now. What we need is cooperation." When a complicated situation became simple, the solution to the problem would also become clear. In the past 6 months, the Giant Group and the Southeast Group had a pleasant cooperation and carried out internal reshuffling. But both sides were very clear that their cooperation would end a year later. At that time, the Giant Group would no longer need the Southeast Group, and they were doomed to go their separate ways. But in the foreseeable future, the Southeast Group still needed the support of the Giant Group. After all, in a turbulent situation, neutrality often meant cowardice, especially in the face of huge interests. Once the Giant Group parted ways with the Southeast Group, it was very likely that they would attack the Southeast Group in the next second. The Southeast Group must unite the Giant Group by its side. The intention of the internal reshuffling of the Giant Group was very clear, and Dongqing Wudi was also very determined. In this case, it was only a matter of time before Li Tianlan left the desert. If he hadn't cooperated with the Southeast Group, Li Tianlan might have come out now. It was said that a month ago, Hua Zhengyang, the director of Zhongzhou State, personally visited Li Tianlan in the desert prison and intended to ask him to come out, but Li Tianlan refused. It was not that he couldn't come out, but that he didn't want to come out for the time being. Li Tianlan's freedom couldn't be used as a bargaining chip, so if they wanted to win over the Giant Group, they could only consider Li Tianlan's future. Unify Tiannan. This was a condition that neither Li Tianlan nor the Giant Group could refuse. Although Li Tianlan could also do this without the intervention of the Wang family of Beihai, it would take a longer time. Li Tianlan was only in his 20s this year. Taking over Tiannan in 3 years and taking over Tiannan in 5 years didn't seem to make much difference, But there was still a difference, especially for the future layout of the giant group. I should talk to him, Wang Jingxin said. Of course, I plan to go to the desert prison in the near future. Wang Shengxiao nodded and smiled. If you have time, Shun, if I have time, I'll go to see my son. Wang Jingxin took a sip of wine and suddenly said, what if the target is not Speaker 1? Temporarily. Wang Shengxiao's eyes were gentle. Even if it's not, it's only temporarily. They will definitely keep a close eye on this position, and won't let it go. So this time, even if it's not Speaker 1, I will still talk to Li Tianlan. This is not the only way, but at present, it seems to be the most effective way. Wang Jingxin nodded silently. It was not easy for the Wang family of Beihai to stabilize the situation now. At their lowest point, what they had to do was to recuperate and keep their bottom line. In this regard, Li Tianlan was their natural ally. This was the same as when he killed Qi Mulin. The Wang family of Beihai took the initiative to help him. The significance of Tiannan to Li Tianlan was exactly the same as the significance of Beihai province to the Wang family of Beihai. Zhengzhou state could move the speaker of Beihai and threaten the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai. In the future, it could move the speaker of Tiannan and threaten the foundation of Emperor Dong's palace, and vice versa. But there was a premise. That was the significance of Tiannan to Li Tianlan. It was not the significance of Xianyuan City to Li Tianlan. At least, it should not be just Xianyuan City. Everyone understood this truth. Therefore, Wang Shengxiao was still relatively optimistic about the upcoming negotiations. Wang Jingxin drank the wine in the flagon in silence. Suddenly he laughed and changed the topic. Go to my house when you leave. Your sister-in-law made a few pairs of baby shoes for Haotian. They are very comfortable. Just take them as gifts for the child. Thank you. Wang Shengxiao laughed. Thinking of his newborn child, his eyes were a little dazed. He had not really seen his child. But the little baby in the video seemed so fragile to him. Wang Shengxiao was very clear that if the Wang family of Beihai could survive the current difficulties, then in the near future, 20 or 30 years later, the very fragile baby would also carry more and more things. Just like his whole life. After standing in this position for hundreds of years, every clan leader seemed to be shouldering far more than what they had obtained. Wang Shengxiao glanced at Wang Jingxin. His eyes were a little tired. At this moment he thought of many people. Many people. The ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai, the names on the stage of formidable person. Wang Jingxin in front of him, the 7 major sword-holding families. He thought of himself, Wang Tianzong, Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei. Hundreds of years were like a chessboard. Different people in different eras played different chess pieces on this chessboard. Before walking on the stage of formidable person, Wang Shengxiao felt that it was glory. But sitting on the stage of formidable person for half a year, he began to think again and again whether it was worth it for so many people to sacrifice without complaint or to betray at all costs. He suddenly thought of the night before he left Eastern Europe half a year ago. That night, in Fanio City, he was drinking with his second uncle. Looking at Wang Xiaoyao, who was getting more and more gloomy, he calmly told him that his father's injury was very serious, even at the juncture of life and death. That night, Wang Xiaoyao just drank quietly. It was not until he got on the plane that he said something faintly, an extremely indifferent sentence. Life is like this. Death is death. Death was death. Wang Shengxiao smiled. No one knew what he was thinking at this moment. Death was death. Was it worth it? Chapter 770. There was no sound, no time, no direction, no light, no dream. His consciousness was clearer than ever. He kept falling in the darkness. There seemed to be no end to the falling. There was only darkness and silence around him. And pain. He didn't know when the pain started. At the moment he felt the pain that seemed to tear his whole body had spread all over his body. It was not as if. It was a real pain. That tearing feeling was extremely clear, like the most precise instrument in the world. The instrument enveloped his body, tearing at every corner of his body, inside and out. The cycle repeated endlessly, and it was extremely sharp and fierce. His brain, limbs, and torso. The pain was everywhere. Every inch of his flesh and blood was torn apart. It was as if thousands of swords were pulling on his body. His skin was torn to shreds, and the swords pierced deep into his flesh, tearing apart his blood vessels. Blood seemed to flow out, and every inch of his muscles was torn apart by the swords. The fine sword intent was not surging. It was not like a big river, but like rain. It fell from the sky. Endless rain. The rain-like sword intent kept cutting every bone in his body. The sharp sword energy seemed to penetrate into every cell in his body, and finally into his soul. This was a torture more terrible than death by dismemberment. Every minute and every second, his body seemed to be torn apart alive. The absolutely strong willpower made it impossible for him to lose consciousness. The pain that went deep into his soul made him scream and twitch wildly in the darkness, but he couldn't make any sound at all. This darkness seemed to be infinitely vast. It was absolutely silent. There was only darkness. The sound of blood flowing seemed to be an illusion, but it also seemed to be really echoing. The intense pain that made people crazy tormented his heart and mind tenaciously with his heartbeat. The pain had reached the limit. Everything had become numb. The darkness became chaotic. Amidst the long silence, the tearing pain started again. The body that seemed to be cut into powder seemed to be reorganized again. And then it was the most cruel torture. There was no sound, no time, no direction, no coma, no light, no dream. He was falling forever. It was like an eternal sinking. Again and again. He couldn't remember how many times he had been tortured, and he didn't even know how long it had been. 3 days. 3 months. 3 years. Even 3 centuries. Long, desolate, and silent. Countless tortures always came again when his numb body forgot the pain. It was sword intent. The vast and boundless sword intent was close to eternal sword intent. It was like the endless 6 paths of reincarnation, and also like the sharp and fierce 24 moves of sword. Countless sword wills were like tiny runes, like Mount Shu, like the Jade Pool, like the way of swords from all over the world. Yes, the way of the sword. There was no difference in swordsmanship. This was neither the 6 paths of reincarnation, nor the 24 moves of sword. This was the pure path of the sword. It was the simplest, but it encompassed everything. That was why it was perfect. The seemingly fine and weak sword intent was wreaking havoc in every part of his body. His powerful life force continued to heal. And then he was torn again and again, and then healed again. The sword chi was endless. But his life force was getting weaker and weaker. Under the almost uninterrupted pain, he constantly struggled on the verge of death. After an incomparably long time, he seemed to have forgotten who he was and where he was. Only his survival instinct was still supporting him. Live on, live on. The first wisp of life force poured into this dark space like a sweet spring. Like running water. There was more and more running water, more and more rapid, and finally it became a vast ocean. The sword chi did not weaken at all, and it was still constantly circulating. But the healing process of his torn body was constantly speeding up. And the speed of the sword chi tearing his body was a little slower. His body was still falling in the darkness, but he had begun to try his best to control his body. He really tried his best. The pain became even more distinct and unrelenting. His flesh and blood seemed to be gradually merging with the majestic vitality. The speed of the sword chi tearing his body was a little slower again. He didn't know his current state, and he didn't even know what his current fall meant. He just wanted to leave this crazy darkness and regain control of his own body. Move. Even if he just moved a finger. Try. He kept trying. In the dark space of eternal fall, a storm of sword intent appeared one after another. The almost world-destroying sword chi did not stir up any waves in the dark space. There was only silence here. Thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times. The truly indestructible will supported him to keep trying. And it eventually became instinct. The sword chi was still endless, raging constantly. When the excruciating pain exceeded a certain limit, he finally felt his broken body. That feeling was not the feeling in the darkness, but a very clear perception. The fall stopped. He stood in the darkness, feeling the crazy sword chi raging in his body. His whole body trembled, but he could not make a sound. So he stood where he was, feeling the pain, and took a deep breath. Bang! There seemed to be a slight sound in the dark space. The sound was very light, as if it came from a distant place. But in this almost eternal silence, this voice was like a clap of thunder. This was the first sound he heard. Bang! Another sound came. In the darkness, a softness surged over and completely wrapped his body, like a viscous sea. He vaguely remembered a picture. In the cold sea, the great pressure pressed on him like the world. Behind him was the submarine. His body fell on the surface of the deep sea, walking forward step by step. Then what? He tried hard to think. It seemed like it happened a long time ago, but it also seemed like it happened not long ago. Then in the deep sea, he struck with his sword. In the dark and viscous water, he stretched out his palm subconsciously. Where is the sword? The water rippled slowly. In an instant, light appeared in the boundless darkness. A cold and majestic sword gleam. Sword. Countless swords filled the entire darkness with a single thought from him. The pain became clearer. But his mind became extremely calm. He had no choice. In the darkness, the sky was filled with sword shadows. He picked up a sword casually. The blade trembled slightly. When do you plan to go to the desert? On the stage of Formidable Person, Wang Jingxin tidied up the food box and asked, "Don't you want to go with me?" Although he was a high official, he was not good at drinking. He drank a lot tonight, so he was obviously a little drunk. His body looked shaky, but his mind was very clear. "I'll wait here." Wang Shengxiao shook his head. "Now we don't know the specific plan of the other party. If we go to see Li Tianlan rashly, we won't get any results. This is a game, but first we have to see the means of the academics and the prince group, estimate the price we and the giant group have to pay, and plan an expected result. If everything is within the acceptable range, then the deal can be made. Now how? I can tell Li Tianlan what I can give him, but I can't tell him what he and the giant group will lose. Such a cooperation will not work out." Wang Jingxin was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "That's right." Wang Shengxiao chuckled and said, "Well, it's late. Take a rest. If I disturb you, sister-in-law may scold me." Wang Jingxin laughed and waved his hand. "Let's go." Wang Shengxiao nodded and suddenly said, "Before going to Jianghuai, go to Yuzhou and see Minister Yi." Yi Dongsheng? Wang Jingxin was slightly stunned. It was almost certain that Yi Dongsheng would become a director next year. If there was no big accident, this result could not be changed. The so-called big accident was that the Wang family of Beihai would be completely destroyed at that time. Compared with the advance and retreat of Wang Qinglei and Wen Xiyuan, deciding Yi Dongsheng's position in advance was a means of the Southeast Group to stabilize the situation. Yi Dongsheng could be said to be the next flag figure and spiritual leader of the Southeast Group. If she went to see Yi Dongsheng at this time, did he have any arrangement? Wang Jingxin looked at Wang Shengxiao with some inquiry in her eyes. Wang Shengxiao answered with a cold voice, "The matter of Jianghuai can't be delayed. Get ready." Wang Jingxin's heart trembled. She nodded and said, "I understand." Wang Shengxiao smiled and raised his hand. It seemed that he wanted to shake hands with Wang Jingxin. However, he suddenly stopped moving. A gust of wind blew over the stage of Formidable Person. It was the highest place in Mount Dibbing, and there would be sea breeze all the time. But Wang Shengxiao instinctively felt that something was wrong. Because of the wind direction, the east wind passed through. But just at that moment, there seemed to be a reverse flow over the entire Beihai. The west wind wrinkled and was extremely cold. Wang Shengxiao suddenly looked up. The sky was full of stars, the bright moon, and the deep night. But everything in his sight became blurred. The whole space seemed to be distorted, and the world was in a trance. Wang Jingxin even thought that he had drunk too much. He shook his head hard. Wang Shengxiao tightly pursed his lips and did not speak. He silently raised his head and looked at the distorted heaven and earth. The west wind stopped. There was a sudden dead silence between the heaven and earth. The sword energy, which was so majestic that it could almost fill the heaven and earth, appeared silently over Beihai. It was densely packed. There seemed to be tens of millions of sword energy in the silent night sky in an instant. The sword energy floated quietly. More and more, it filled the space between heaven and earth. No one knew the source of the sword energy. The unimaginable sword energy instantly covered Beihai, and the entire Mount Dibbing. There was a dead silence in the sea area of tens of thousands of meters. Bang! Without any warning, the sword energy that covered the space of tens of thousands of meters suddenly vibrated. It was clear and stable, supreme and supreme. The vibrating sound instantly spread from the deep sea to the entire Mount Dibbing. It was like the heartbeat of the sky. Chapter 771. Yuzhou Hidden Dragon Sea. The warm sunshine sprinkled in the spacious office. Behind the desk, Li Huaqing silently looked at the document in his hand, narrowed his eyes, and took a sip of tea. The content of the document was very formal, with the seal of the Wuxia Parliament. It could be said to be a recommendation letter, and it was a recommendation letter that did not go through the normal procedures. Wang Qinglei, the speaker of Wuxia, recommended the deputy governor of Wuxia to be the deputy speaker of a province in western Zhongzhou state. The provincial parliament was generally not qualified to do so, but Wang Qinglei was different. He was a member of Zhongzhou state. Therefore, although this recommendation letter had the signatures of most of the directors of Wuxia, it could actually be said that Wang Qinglei proposed a personnel transfer as a member of parliament. This document did not pass through the Ministry of Personnel, and appeared directly on Li Huaqing's desk. In just a few hours, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing had received the news. The two sat face to face, thinking about the contents of the document, and no one spoke for a while. "What do you think?" Li Huaqing suddenly asked. "We can give it to him." Chen Fangqing didn't hesitate at all. On the way here, he had already thought of everything he needed to think about. Some of the possible consequences were also within his range of tolerance. He's under a lot of pressure now. It's equivalent to asking us for help. Plus, 1 year's time shouldn't be a problem. Wang Tonglu. Li Huaqing looked at the document and whispered to himself. Wang Tonglu was the deputy speaker of Wuxia that Wang Qinglei intended to transfer this time. He was one of the directors of Wuxia. He had served in Wuxia for a long time, deeply rooted and highly respected. With his qualifications, if he wanted to be transferred, it was almost no problem for him to become the governor of a province. He was the backbone of the Southeast Group. If Wuxia had not suffered a major change, he would have been the best candidate to be the governor of Wuxia after Wang Qinglei left Wuxia. In the past year, the internal situation of Zhongzhou state had changed, especially in the past 6 months. In the turbulent times, Wang Tonglu, who had been favored by others, had become gloomy. The reason was actually not complicated at all. Now Wang Tonglu could be said to be the only capable general of the Southeast Group among the 13 directors of Wuxia. Wang Qinglei could also be said to be a member of the Southeast Group, but everyone knew that he had almost completely fallen out with the Southeast Group. Wang Tonglu was a capable general who was truly loyal to the Southeast Group and Mount Dibbing. There were many such capable generals in Wuxia before. However, as Wang Qinglei's actions in Wuxia became more and more intense, such people gradually became fewer and fewer. After Yu Chuanguang, the former mayor of Huiting, became the governor of Wuxia, Wang Qinglei was even more free. As a close friend of Wang Xiaoyao, Yu Chuanguang's arrival could be said to be a blessing for Wang Xiao. It was Yao's official statement. He and Wang Qinglei cooperated very well. In a very short time, they had completely cleared out the forces loyal to Mount Dibbing. If Wang Tonglu left for the Southeast Group, Wuxia, the most developed province in Zhongzhou state that they had held for hundreds of years and had always been their backyard, would be completely lost. This was the core foundation of the Southeast Group. Li Huaqing hesitated. He was not distressed for the Southeast Group. In fact, this was their goal, and at this point, there was nothing to be distressed about. The Southeast Group had long lost control of Wuxia, but Wang Tonglu was there. At least he could be regarded as a fig leaf. Beihai and Wuxia were the two most core places of the Southeast Group. Now, when they were preparing to target Beihai, they wanted to tear off the fig leaf of Wuxia. Li Huaqing felt that they had gone too far. He was the president, so he must take the overall situation into consideration. If this step was so intense, it would undoubtedly cause a backlash from the Southeast Group, and the loss would undoubtedly outweigh the gain. Chen Fangqing knew his concerns. He hesitated and said slowly, "We still have to promise him. But the direction of Wang Tonglu's office is not very good. Let him be the governor. It is not appropriate to force him out and give him the position of deputy speaker. Li Huaqing nodded slowly. I will communicate with Comrade Yi Dongsheng on this matter later. Chen Fangqing nodded noncommittally. While supporting Wang Qinglei, he also had to take care of the face of the Southeast Group. The current situation was too sensitive. They had to maintain the situation while attacking. As long as Wang Tonglu could leave, it meant that Wang Qinglei had completely taken over Wuxia. Moreover, they did not have to worry about Wang Qinglei covering the sky in Wuxia for the time being. After all, he only had less than a year. After a year, he would come to Yuzhou. At that time, Yu Chuanguang would take advantage of the situation and become the new member and Wu Yue's speaker. In this way, Wang Qinglei's faction would have a member and a director. This kind of strength was already a new group that was not weaker than the North group. Therefore, this step of Wang Tonglu's was very crucial. As long as Yi Dongxing agreed, it was okay to give him some benefits to balance the situation. Now the biggest target of the academics was Wu Yue and Beihai. Next year, the governor of Wu Yue was bound to be vacant. Whether the academics would get this position or give it to the prince group would depend on their harvest in Beihai a year later. We can give it to him. Li Huaqing finally nodded. But he also needs to speed up his actions. Chen Fangqing nodded, held the cup, and said, I'll talk to him. Beihai's conscription is getting more and more outrageous. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, and his tone was a little solemn. Now the scale of the Beihai Corps had doubled, and hundreds of thousands of troops were training all day long. The army could be said to cover the sky and the sun, and the scale of the maneuver was getting larger and larger. These were undoubtedly warnings from Beihai to Zhongzhou State. Wang Shengxiao's strength that time was not meaningless. At least now, when the academics and the prince group targeted the Southeast group again, they had begun to consider how to maintain the situation and take care of their thoughts. In the end, it was still the same sentence. Zhongzhou State versus Beihai. This was not a question of whether they could defeat them, or whether they dared to fight. It was a question of whether it was necessary to fight. The answer was very simple. There was no need. There was no need at all. What they wanted was to control Beihai, that was all. But for Wang Xingxiao, he had his bottom line. There was no need to talk about the necessity of guarding Beihai. This was also not a question of whether they could defeat them or not, but whether they dared to fight. Wang Shengxiao dared to fight. He really dared to fight. The Wang family of Beihai had always kept a small number of nuclear weapons. The number of nuclear weapons was very small. If they were launched at Zhongzhou State was 100% sure that it could intercept all the nuclear weapons of Beihai outside Zhongzhou State, because they really did not have many nuclear weapons. But what if Wang Xingxiao wanted to use them in Beihai? No matter how few nuclear weapons they had, as long as they exploded in Beihai province, it was enough to completely sink 160,000 square kilometers of land in Beihai province to the bottom of the sea. The radiation and aftermath of the explosion could even affect Liaodong, which was closest to Beihai. If they really forced Wang Shengxiao to this point, Beihai province would be completely submerged by the sea and disappear from the map. Liaodong would suffer heavy losses. And what did Zhongzhou State get? Nothing was gained. This was not their original intention at all. Their original intention was not to destroy Beihai, but to control Beihai province. In this way, when Wang Shengxiao said that he really dared to fight, Zhongzhou State had to adjust its strategy. When their power expanded to the extent of the Wang family of Beihai, foreign enemies could bring them setbacks, but it was almost impossible to completely destroy them. The only way was to break their rule from the inside. Wang Qinglei. He was the most suitable candidate. As long as Wang Qinglei became the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, then everything could be discussed. Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing were willing to support Wang Qinglei. But Wang Qinglei also had to do something to put great pressure on the Wang family of Beihai in other aspects. What's his plan? Li Huaqing glanced at Chen Fangqing and asked slowly. Chen Fangqing took a sip of tea and said slowly, I talked to him once before. He told me that in Europe, there is another His Majesty. Chapter 772. The soft light fell on some thin documents. Mellad looked at His Majesty in front of him with a serious expression, and silently waited for his orders. This was the underground laboratory in Italos. Every once in a while His Majesty would appear here. Most of the time, this could be regarded as the place where he and Mellad had agreed to meet. The air was heavy and silent. Mellad, who had been waiting for a long time, finally couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, are you going to make a move?" "What, are you scared?" His Majesty chuckled, picked up a peanut on the table, and put it into his mouth. In half a year's time, His Majesty's realm seemed to have become more and more unfathomable. The light that enveloped his body was vast and deep, like starlight, but also like clouds and mist. Even though Mellad was an expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, he couldn't see through his true appearance when facing him at this time. To be honest, a little. Mellad laughed. He was a little simple and honest. "But if your Majesty has an order, I will do it." His Majesty grunted and held the document without saying anything for a while. This was an internal document from the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. Of course, it was a copy, not the original. The original copy had appeared on the desk of the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State a day ago, and the Ministry of Personnel had sent the document to Wuxia Province as soon as possible, appointing Deputy Governor Wang Tonglu, the director of Wuxia Province, as the governor of a province in Zhongzhou State. The document had come into effect. A few hours ago, Wuxia had already held a farewell party. Wang Tonglu, the backbone of the Southeast Group, had already left Wuxia dejectedly. This also meant that Wang Qinglei and Yu Chuanguang had completely cut off Wuxia from the Southeast Group's hands and firmly controlled it. It had become the core base and base of their new group. Mellad had already read the document. He also knew what this meant. Wuxia was a gift from the Central State Parliament to Wang Qinglei. Vaguely, he was also expressing his support for Wang Qinglei's decision to establish his own sect. After giving such a big gift, Wang Qinglei had to return the favor. "Don't worry," His Majesty said slowly. "Wait a little longer." "But preparations must be made," Mellad said softly. "Besides, the preparation is almost complete. 6 Knights Commanders, 12 Grand Knights, and 200 Knights Templar can set off at any time." Their cooperation with the Church had been completely finalized, and they were the closest long-term allies. The Pope had already fully expressed his trust and welcome to His Majesty. All of this was because of a story that His Majesty had told the Pope half a year ago, or the story the Pope had seen. Therefore, both sides temporarily put down most of their vigilance. After the coronation, His Majesty and Mellad began to reorganize the temple as quickly as possible. This was the bargaining chip they used to trade with the Vatican in Eastern Europe. After Chaos, the head knight of the Knights Templar, had died in the hands of Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe, the Knights Templar had been in a leaderless state. However, as the spokesperson of the Vatican in the Dark World, the foundation of the Knights Templar was extremely strong. It could be said that it had the structure of a true superpower. Mellad had lost some things in the process of taking over, but he had taken over nearly 70% of the entire Knights Templar. Today, the Knights Templar could almost be said to have broken away from the Vatican and become a close ally of the Vatican. It could be said that it had become a close ally of the Vatican. Mellad's strength was higher than that of Chaos. With His Majesty, although the size of the Knights Templar was a little small, it was no worse than in its heyday. When the undercurrent of the Dark World was surging, no one noticed that an undercurrent lurking around Italos had completely taken shape. It had become a brand new superpower, lurking in the Dark World. Although half a year was not a long time, Mellad had been the vice commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps before. It was not difficult for him to take over the Knights Templar. During this period of time, it was enough for him to win people's hearts and stabilize the foundation. After the internal situation stabilized, the next step was naturally to expand outwards. The brand new Knights Templar needed a real high-profile appearance to tell the whole Dark World of their existence. Mellad had been looking forward to it. But he didn't expect that this appearance would be aimed at the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai, Mellad didn't panic, but he was really a little nervous. But His Majesty and Wang Qinglei had always had a cooperative relationship. Wang Qinglei wanted to give a big gift to the Zhongzhou State Parliament. His Majesty was the most powerful force he could borrow. "Prepare more people," His Majesty said slowly. Wang Qinglei should contact me in the near future. Let the people you have prepared now go to East Island to hide, and find an opportunity to test them first. Melad was stunned, then nodded and agreed. 6 commanders of knights, 12 grand knights, and 200 knights Templar. The lineup he had prepared was strong enough, especially in the Dark World, where there was an extreme shortage of invincible realm experts. This was a power that could turn the world upside down wherever they went. Knights Templar was the foundation of a superpower. The commander of Knights Templar must be an invincible realm expert. And the weakest of the 12 commanders of knights was an expert at the peak of the Thundershocking realm, or a half-step invincible realm. The Grand Knights were required to be in the Thundershocking realm. The Knights Templar were the elites of Knights Templar. The Fire-Flaming realm was the foundation, and there were also experts in the Thundershocking realm leading the team. If these forces fought with the Wang family of Beihai, they naturally couldn't win. But their task wasn't to fight. What they needed to do was to put enough pressure on Mount Dibbing. When the pressure reached a certain level, the support of Zhongzhou State would arrive as scheduled. At that time, they could take advantage of the situation to retreat. At that time, Zhongzhou State would have enough reasons to start intervening in the internal affairs of the Wang family of Beihai. Of course, Zhongzhou State also needed to complete all this through Wang Qinglei, which was equivalent to improving Wang Qinglei's status in Beihai province in a disguised form. Melad, His Majesty suddenly said. Tell me, what do we need to be worthy of what we are paying now? Melad narrowed his eyes, and there was some excitement in his eyes. Wang Qinglei needed to borrow power, and Knights Templar needed to bleed. Since it was cooperation, Wang Qinglei definitely needed to give enough compensation. There were too many things they needed in the huge Wang family of Beihai. How about a team? Melad said with some excitement. The glorious team of Knights Templar was one of the things he lost when he integrated Knights Templar. It belonged to the core power of the Vatican. Since Knights Templar no longer belonged to the Vatican, the Pope naturally had to take this part of the power back. Melad had always been envious of this. The Wang family of Beihai has more than one team. Melad chuckled and said, their team is equipped with the world's most advanced fighter jets, which can enhance our strength. It's too petty. His Majesty thought for a moment and said quietly. Melad froze for a moment and said cautiously, what do you want, Your Majesty? His Majesty was silent for a moment and laughed. I want something he can afford to give, but he absolutely doesn't want to give. Chapter 773. Melad didn't know what it was that Wang Qinglei could afford to give but absolutely didn't want to give. At the very least, it wouldn't be a team. Every superpower had its own team. To put it bluntly, the team was the air power of a superpower. A standard team had 12 fighter jets, 5 armed helicopters, 2 transport planes, and an air refueling aircraft. According to different situations, when fighting at close range from the base camp, the team would be equipped with missile arrays, luxuriously equipped with stealth reconnaissance aircraft, and so on. These big toys were very precious trump cards in the hands of any superpower. But for the Wang family of Beihai, this was definitely not something that could hurt them. The medium-sized aircraft carrier owned by the Beihai Corps was enough to provide countless possibilities for their tactics in the state of war. Therefore, when the superpowers only had 1 or 2 teams, the Wang family of Beihai had a team group, which was not a number that could be included in 1 or 2 teams at all. If it wasn't a team, then what did His Majesty want? Melad was silent for a while. Just as he was about to speak, the doorbell suddenly rang. His Majesty waved his hand. Melad walked over and opened the door of the dormitory. Outside the door, a beautiful woman with an extremely numb expression stood there, holding a tray in her hand. Dear Dr. Murphy, I hope you can let me hear the good news I want to hear. His Majesty laughed with some pleasure. Murphy's face suddenly turned pale for a moment. He bit his lip tightly and said in a dry voice, the antidote is still being studied. His Majesty said calmly, do you have a direction? Yes, but we are still trying. This kind of toxin is very terrible. We can barely suppress its toxin now, but we can't find a solution for the time being. Murphy's voice was a little bitter and anxious. The last time I came here, you told me the same thing. I'm a little disappointed. His Majesty said blandly. No, it's different from last time. Dr. Murphy trembled. This time, the medicine is more effective than the last time. Your Majesty, I'm really working hard. All right, Murphy. His Majesty waved his hand. You're too nervous. I believe you're working hard enough, but your progress is still too slow. I hope you can remember that your daughter also has this kind of toxin in her body. I can still barely hold on, but your lovely daughter doesn't have much time left. Do you understand? Murphy lowered his voice. He lowered his head, and a look of extreme hatred and fear flashed in his eyes. She took 2 steps forward with the tray and said softly, I understand. His Majesty stretched out his arm, revealing his veins. On the tray was a syringe and a tube of transparent, colorless medicine. Murphy took the syringe and carefully injected the medicine into His Majesty's body. During the whole process, Mellad stood next to His Majesty. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Murphy's every move. His Majesty closed his eyes. As the drug was injected, his body became more and more stiff. Finally, his body completely solidified on the chair. He did not breathe, and even his heart seemed to have stopped beating. Mellad did not say anything. Murphy waited quietly. After some time, His Majesty's body trembled, and he let out a long sigh. The cloud of starlight that enveloped him began to circulate continuously, and the traces became more and more natural. Even its scale seemed to have expanded a lot. Mellad slowly relaxed and looked at the starry clouds around His Majesty. There was some awe in his eyes. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he naturally knew what this starlight cloud was. This was a domain. It was not a pseudo-domain. It was a domain that was truly flawless and had even surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. The perfection of the domain also represented His Majesty's true realm. However, unlike the super experts who had really surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, His Majesty's domain could only be maintained in a very small space for some reason. This was undoubtedly His Majesty's biggest weakness. His Majesty slowly stood up, moved his body, and sighed comfortably. Go, Murphy. You have 2 hours to spend with your husband and daughter. His Majesty said softly. Murphy bowed deeply and couldn't wait to turn around and leave the dormitory of the laboratory. The door was closed again. His Majesty slowly moved his body and adapted to the strange power. His movements were very slow, but the space of the entire dormitory was slightly distorted as he moved slowly. Mellad. He suddenly spoke in a soft voice. Your Majesty. Mellad took a step forward. His Majesty laughed. After the next injection, maybe my strength will be close to your current level. Your Majesty is too modest, even now merely. Even now, Mellad is no match for you. Mellad's voice was very respectful, and it came from the bottom of his heart. His Majesty's strength at his peak had completely surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Although he was not really supreme, seriously speaking, his strength should be a little stronger than that of Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu in Eastern Europe. He could not compare with Wang Tianzong in the end day of Mormons, but compared with Wang Tianzong before Mormons, he should be on par with him. With such strength, once the domain or sword energy was expanded, it would be enough to cover a distance of 10,000 meters in an instant. His Majesty could not do this now. His domain could only reach its peak within a distance of a few meters around him. But this was not because his strength was not enough, but because of his body. Even if Mellad was close to the peak of the invincible realm now, if he fought with His Majesty in close combat within a distance of a few meters, he would definitely not be a match for His Majesty. Of course, he was not a match for His Majesty in close combat. If he wanted to leave, His Majesty's domain was too small, and could not keep him. His Majesty glanced at him and touched Mellad's head with a smile. Mellad maintained his bent posture, and lowered his head. These shackles, His Majesty sighed and said. I've been carrying them for too long. Dr. Murphy still has some strength. I believe that she can develop an antidote as soon as possible. As long as the poison in your Majesty's body is removed and your Majesty returns to the peak, we will be the #1 force in the dark world. Mellad said respectfully. There's not much time left. His Majesty said softly. Li Tianlan won't give me too much time, and neither will Wang Tianzong. Before Li Tianlan reaches the peak of the invincible realm, and before Wang Tianzong recovers from his injury, I must find a way. There must be a way, Mellad said in a deep voice. Of course. His Majesty smiled and narrowed his eyes. As long as he could recover to his peak state before that, with his strength at his peak, he should be able to try to break into the desert prison. Under the suppression of the intensive firepower of the desert prison, he would kill Li Tianlan at the risk of being seriously injured. Then it would be Wang Tianzong. Once the two of them died, he would no longer have any scruples in this era. His Majesty closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It seemed that every cell in his body was carrying a kind of eager power. The communication video suddenly rang. Mellad turned his head and took a look. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, Your Majesty, it's Wang Qinglei's communication. Chapter 774. Mellad left the room. The communication from afar had been connected, and Wang Qinglei's figure appeared on the screen. His clothes were neat, and his expression was calm and dignified. His Majesty, who was wrapped in starlight clouds and mist, looked at the screen quietly. They were silent for a long time. Wang Tonglu has been transferred away. After an unknown period of time, Wang Qinglei slowly opened his mouth, his voice indifferent. Congratulations, His Majesty said with a chuckle. The last heavyweight in Wuxia who was qualified to resist Wang Qinglei left Wuxia dejectedly. The most developed province in Zhongzhou state had now completely fallen into Wang Qinglei's hands. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Wang Qinglei could go further next year, even if he could not reach the top in the end, a new group would have taken shape. With the foundation of Wuxia, it could completely support the continuous development of a new group. This was indeed worthy of congratulation. But the premise was that Wang Qinglei could really improve next year. Wang Qinglei took a deep look at His Majesty and suddenly asked, "Who are you?" This problem had been plaguing him for too long. The cooperation between the two had been going on for a long time. He almost watched the other party turn from an ordinary person with nothing into a giant who could really stand at the peak of the dark world. The cooperation between the two was very obscure, and every time His Majesty made a move, he had a very clear purpose. It turned out that almost all of his plans were successful, so he had more and more chips in his hands. In his eyes, the dark world seemed to be like a chessboard. He kept putting chess pieces on the chessboard, looking careful but inexplicable. The chaos in Eastern Europe became the most critical step. He did not plot against those Invincible Realm experts, but after a large number of Invincible Realm experts died, he successfully got Knights Templar. All the accumulation was completely transformed at that moment, allowing him to reach the peak of the dark world in one fell swoop. Wang Qinglei didn't know if His Majesty had any other bargaining chips, but at this moment in his heart, His Majesty was almost the strongest person in the dark world. Whether it was his personal strength or the power he held in his hands, the other party definitely had more than just temple. In fact, the temple was only a part of their strength that they had purposely revealed. If Wang Qinglei did not know his true identity, he would not have dared to cooperate with him. This was also the main reason why he had hesitated to contact the other party until now. Is it important? His Majesty chuckled. His voice was very gentle, as if he would never be impatient. Very important. Wang Qinglei nodded seriously and said in a deep voice, "No, I think it's more important if you can improve next year." His Majesty said with a smile. Wang Qinglei fell silent. Relatively speaking, this was indeed the most important matter. The attitude of the academics and the prince group to support him was extremely obvious. Wuyu had been transferred frequently in the past 6 months, and it was almost clear. When the Southeast group reshuffled internally, the first one they thought of was Wuyu. They also hoped that Wang Qinglei would be alone in Wuyu. That was the most dangerous period for Wang Qinglei. He went to Yuzhou to meet Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing to express his attitude. In the end, the two groups joined hands to withstand the pressure of the Southeast group. At the same time, they also made a lot of concessions. The premise of the Southeast group's smooth shuffle was to give up Wuyu. Now Wang Qinglei could be said to have his own base camp, and all of this came from the support of the academics and the prince group. In other words, at this time next year, Even if he could go further, he would still be the leader of the Southeast Group in name, but in fact he could already be said to be a member of the Academics and the Prince Group. And the two groups gave him such great support. Wang Qinglei must give something in return. Although a director was important, compared to the Southeast Group, it was not particularly important. Therefore, the Academics and the Prince Group could accept Wang Qinglei swinging between them, because their current interests were the same, which was to take over the Southeast Group. After they divided up the Southeast Group, it was estimated that Wang Qinglei would retire at that time. Naturally, there was no need to worry about these things. Wang Shengxiao had made it clear that he would never compromise. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Zhongzhou State could only strive to break through their position from the inside. Wang Qinglei was the most suitable candidate. Therefore, everyone was very clear that Wang Tonglu's transfer meant that Wang Qinglei completely controlled Wuxia. And after having his own base, Wang Qinglei must take action against the Wang family of Beihai, put pressure on Beihai from the inside, and even create a real breakthrough for Zhongzhou State. The first person Wang Qinglei thought of was His Majesty. What do you want? Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and temporarily stopped thinking about His Majesty's identity. His identity. Since it was cooperation, he must give His Majesty something. After all, the other party was not obliged to help. Huh? His Majesty smiled and said, I should say, what do you need me to do now, so that I can make a price right? Attack Beihai Province. Wang Qinglei said calmly. Invade from all sides, make Beihai Province completely chaotic, spread rumors, reduce the control of Mount Dibing over the people of Beihai, weaken the combat capability of the Beihai Corps, and get the technology of Mount Dibing. I only have one requirement, chaos. He paused and said seriously, the more chaotic the better. Do you want Wang Shengxiao to take the initiative to ask for help from Zhongzhou State when he can't hold on? His Majesty's tone was playful. Wang Qinglei did not speak. In fact, Wang Shengxiao's attitude was not within his consideration. After all, Beihai was a part of Zhongzhou State. When Beihai Province was chaotic to a certain extent, Zhongzhou State could take the initiative to intervene in the affairs of Beihai. It was useless even if Wang Shengxiao disagreed. Last time Zhongzhou State forced the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Shengxiao could react violently. This time Beihai was in internal chaos, and Zhongzhou State took the initiative to help. Would Wang Shengxiao dare to react violently? If he dared to do so, it would be treason. Can you do it? Wang Qinglei asked calmly. His Majesty was silent for about a minute. 4 invincible realm experts, 40 thunder-shocking realm experts, and more than 500 fire-flaming realm experts. His voice slowly sounded across the screen, like a bloody storm. This is a conservative estimate. Do you think it's enough? 4 invincible realm experts. How many invincible realm experts were there in the entire dark world now? Wang Qinglei's heart suddenly shook, and his face looked a little pale. This kind of lineup. It was not a question of whether it was enough or not, but how much did he have to pay if the other side sent out such a lineup? What do you want? Wang Qinglei asked again. What do you want to give me? His Majesty asked back. Wang Qinglei looked at the screen expressionlessly, and said nothing. His Majesty chuckled, looked at the screen and said calmly, I want Beihai, or Kunlun City. Choose one of the two. Which one will you choose? Or, how will the Parliament choose? Chapter 775. Wang Qinglei didn't speak for a long time. He stood in front of the screen, and his firm and calm expression was like a rock, but the obvious rise and fall of his breath still revealed his mood. He even thought he had heard wrong. Beihai Kunlun City. Choose one of the two? This was simply the most absurd request he had ever heard, and it was also the most naked ambition he had ever seen. His Majesty sat down on a reclining chair opposite the screen, and slowly leaned against the back of the chair. The chair shook slightly and made a slight sound. His fingers unconsciously tapped the armrest of the chair, and his voice was neither arrogant nor impatient. How should I choose? Are you crazy? Wang Qinglei said incredulously. His Majesty laughed, and the starlight cloud floated slightly around him. His voice sounded a little indifferent. Likewise, you want to reach the top after leaving the Southeast Group. I want Beihai or Kunlun City. What's the difference? Do you know what you're talking about? Wang Qinglei suppressed his anger and asked word by word. He was indeed shocked by His Majesty's strength. 4 invincible realm experts and dozens of thunder-shocking realm experts. Not to mention now, even before Eastern Europe, this kind of lineup was not something that any force could come up with. No, strictly speaking, no force could come up with so many experts, including the Wang family of Beihai. Before Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai only had 1 invincible realm expert, Wang Tianzong. Even if Heaven Saber DK was counted, there were only 2 of them. Of course, these 2 people had the strength to kill all 4 invincible realm experts. But this did not mean that invincible realm experts were cabbages. Now that all the experts at the peak of the invincible realm were silent, there were less than 10 people in the entire Dark World with peak combat capability, including several newly promoted invincible realm experts. His Majesty could mobilize 4 of them. This number might include himself, but it was enough to shock people. But Wang Qinglei was more shocked by the other party's appetite. You want Beihai, but it's better to be in our hands than in your hands. What the parliament wants is Beihai. Where do you get the courage to snatch things from the parliament of Zhongzhou State? Wang Qinglei said in disbelief. The game between the parliament of Zhongzhou State and the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be fruitful at present. But strictly speaking, even if they lost Wuxia, the Wang family of Beihai would not really suffer a serious injury. The game between the 2 sides was destined to be a very long process. 10 years, 20 years, or even longer. Everyone involved in it was prepared to fight a protracted war. The most important reason was the Wang family of Beihai, or the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. His Majesty actually wanted the North Sea. Not to mention how likely it was, even if he really got Beihai, how could he face Zhongzhou State? The current game was only an internal problem of Zhongzhou State, so it needed to be discussed, compromised, and balanced. If a foreign force like His Majesty occupied Beihai, it would be an invasion. There was no game at all. Zhongzhou State did not need to hesitate at all, and would directly send troops to destroy everything His Majesty had. 4 invincible realm experts were indeed terrible, but in the face of the most powerful hegemon country in the world, even if you had 40 invincible realm experts, what could you do? You want to enter Mount Dibbing? Wang Qinglei's expression was completely cold. He did not know if His Majesty was crazy, but even if he was, he would not agree to this condition. Beihai, Kunlun City. One was the territory that Zhongzhou State wanted to completely control the most, and the other was the special warfare center of Zhongzhou State. He would not choose either, and he could not choose either. Don't get me wrong. His Majesty smiled and said, I'm just talking about Beihai, not Mount Dibbing. It's Beihai in history. Beihai in history. Wang Qinglei's eyes narrowed, and he finally understood the other party's intention. The so-called history of the other party had never been recognized by Beihai province. But this history was not strange at all, because people often mentioned it. And it was not a person who often mentioned this history, but a country. East Island. Beihai in their eyes was completely in the past. It was the North Island that once belonged to them hundreds of years ago. In the territory of Beihai province today, it was the south of Kanglan River. The areas of Kanglan, Tongtian, and Qiushui occupied half of the area of Beihai province. What His Majesty wanted was precisely this half of the North Sea province. Wang Qinglei's expression was cold. He had cooperated with His Majesty several times, and they had always been very happy. But this time, His Majesty's appetite was completely beyond his expectation. He did want to reach the top in Zhongzhou State, and he also wanted to take the position of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, but it did not mean that he could tolerate the other party's bottomless destruction of Beihai. That was his Beihai province. He could cooperate with His Majesty to make him go to Beihai to cause chaos, and he could also work with the academics and the prince group to break up the current Beihai. That was because he knew that after he reached the top, he could reverse the situation and reach an agreement with Zhongzhou State again. Now, if he gave half of Beihai to the other party, he would be the eternal sinner of the Wang family of Beihai. He wanted to be the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. How could he be willing to see Beihai divided in his hands? I don't want to. Wang Qinglei's voice was cold. He would rather give up this cooperation than answer. His Majesty's condition. As for the Kunlun city that the other party wanted, that was not something he could decide. I'm afraid it's not up to you, His Majesty said slowly. Don't forget, this is Zhongzhou State. Wang Qinglei said coldly. But it's not your Zhongzhou State yet. His Majesty's tone did not fluctuate at all. I can bypass you and talk to Zhongzhou State. What do you think they will choose? Why do you think Zhongzhou State will agree to you? Wang Qinglei sneered and said. This is the territory of Zhongzhou State. I'm also from Zhongzhou State, His Majesty said blandly. If I control Beihai, I will form a closer relationship with Zhongzhou State. I know what I want, what I can rely on, and what I can bring to Zhongzhou State. Why won't Zhongzhou State agree? Everyone is plotting Beihai. After they succeed, they also need someone to manage it. I'm from Zhongzhou State, not some foreign force. My force can naturally be called the force of Zhongzhou State. After I take Beihai and divide the Beihai province, I can withstand the pressure of Mount Dibing, and make the two groups more relaxed. Why won't they agree? His Majesty smiled and continued. The most important thing is that I will be more obedient than the Wang family of Beihai. My Beihai is a part of Zhongzhou State, a part that really belongs to Zhongzhou State. Wang Qinglei's face twisted and became more and more ugly. Zhongzhou State can't trust you at all. Trust takes time, but cooperation only needs benefits. So far, I haven't done anything wrong to Zhongzhou State. As a Zhongzhou State person, as long as there is a basis for cooperation, Zhongzhou State can naturally see my position clearly. His Majesty said calmly. At present, Zhongzhou State seems to lack a dark force that specializes in overseas affairs. Kunlun City is no longer useful. Li Tianlan's future is in Tiannan. As long as the parliament allows me to expand in the name of Zhongzhou State, I can bring unimaginable benefits to Zhongzhou State. Wang Qinglei was completely silent. He knew very well that as long as His Majesty was sincere, Zhongzhou State would not refuse such cooperation. And there was no reason to refuse. In front of the screen he lit a cigarette. After smoking most of it, he said in a hoarse voice, In that case, what do you still want from me? His Majesty looked at him for a long time, then said with a smile, In fact, it was you who asked me. Wang Qinglei, I will communicate with Zhongzhou State. His Majesty's voice was gentle. But for the sake of you taking the initiative to find me, I can give you a chance. After I take Beihai, you can exchange Kunlun City with me. Chapter 776. Life in the desert prison was like stagnant water, boring and repetitive. There was nothing new, only new stories. The story came from Zhou Tong. It was about his experience in most of his life. Li Tianlan's life was still the same. He meditated every day, thinking about how to enter the invincible realm. But there was one more thing in his leisure time, which was to chat with Zhou Tong. Li Tianlan regarded it as a class, and Zhou Tong regarded it as a memory of his life. His life in his 70s could be said to be magnificent. Deep in the prison, he could still make his family a core part of the prince group. This old man really had too many stories and too much experience. Li Tianlan was very young, so what he lacked most was experience. Looking at the future, the rise of Emperor Dong's palace was almost unstoppable. So Li Tianlan had to learn how to be a qualified leader. Zhou Tong was the best teacher. He didn't have to teach Li Tianlan specific means, but he used to be in a high enough position to teach Li Tianlan what to do when standing at the top, what kind of mind and vision he should have. Zhou Tong was not the only person that Li Tianlan planned to bring out of the desert prison. There were 9 people on the list that Qin Weibai had sorted out, and Zhou Tong was just one of them. Li Tianlan recently paid attention to the status of the 9 people. 2 of them were dead, and 2 of them had become a little delirious. Li Tianlan observed the last one. After learning about his past through Xiaomahai, he finally decided that he was not trustworthy, or in other words, he did not have the conditions that he could use with confidence. In this way, there were only 4 people on the list in his hand. Zhou Tong was one. The other was a Chinese from Annan State. Before entering the prison, he was the head of a large intelligence organization. The intelligence coverage covered more than half of Southeast Asia and Zhongzhou State. At its peak, it even extended its tentacles to Snow Country. It had been nearly 10 years since he was arrested in Zhongzhou State for selling intelligence of Zhongzhou State. The other two were second-to-none financial tycoons in Zhongzhou State before entering the prison, but they eventually became the stepping stones of the Flourishing Age Fund. It could even be said that they were the most important stepping stones since the rise of the Flourishing Age Fund. When they were driven to desperation by Han Donglu, they secretly accepted the capital injection of overseas consortiums and signed a series of agreements full of insider information. One of them was arrested, and the other surrendered. It had been nearly 10 years since they were in prison. Li Tianlan didn't need any supermasters in martial arts. Nowadays, there were at least 30 Thundershocking Realm Masters locked up in the desert prison, and the worst one was close to the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. But Li Tianlan couldn't afford to use this group of people at all. They were either the regional heads of a large force or the ace agents of a country. They were different from the people on Li Tianlan's list. Not to mention Zhou Tong, even the head of the intelligence agency was neutral before entering the prison. After so many years, their value had basically been squeezed out, and such people were not indispensable in relatively mature forces. Under the right opportunity, Li Tianlan could take them out, and it wouldn't touch the nerves of the parliament of Zhongzhou State. The identity of those ace agents was too sensitive. Even if they had been locked up for many years, Li Tianlan didn't think he could change their stand. The most important thing was that although they were strong, their potential had long been exhausted after being locked up for many years. They weren't worth investing in. As for those who had just come in, they were even less trustworthy. Such people were of little value to Li Tianlan. The current lineup of Emperor Dong's palace was enough to support their expansion. What Li Tianlan needed the most now were these masters who were difficult to completely control. Zhou Tong's class time was about 3 hours a day. After that, Li Tianlan would chat with the other 3 people. The person in charge of the intelligence organization, codenamed Mr. Black, was the focus of his attention recently. Emperor Dong's palace now had its own intelligence organization. But because it had been established for a short time, although it didn't lack resources, it was still a little stiff in operation. Therefore, Mr. Black had already made contact with Xianyuan City and contacted the outside world. When Li Tianlan walked into Mr. Black's dormitory, Mr. Black just hung up the video call from Xianyuan City. When he saw Li Tianlan, he was stunned. Then he stood up and said respectfully, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded. "What are you busy with today?" "I'm studying the current topographic map and future planning of Xianyuan City," Mr. Black said with a smile. "I've recently learned about the situation in Tiannan. Xianyuan City's development prospects are very good. Your Highness wants to set up an intelligence organization. Personally, I think it's secondary to get intelligence on the other side. The first thing we need to do is to make sure we don't lose our own intelligence. Xianyuan City is our base camp. We should be able to see even the slightest movement in Xianyuan City." "Come on," Li Tianlan said slowly. Now the intelligence agency of Emperor Dong's palace was controlled by Tianyin, who had left the purgatory of Heaven capital. As an old man of the Li family, and an old man that Li Tianlan was very familiar with, Li Tianlan never doubted him. Mr. Black nodded. He hesitated for a moment and said softly, "Your Highness, I should be able to find some people from Dark Pupil after I get out. They are also very familiar with Southeast Asia. I don't know if Your Highness needs them. If you do, I can let them join Emperor Dong's palace." The intelligence organization that Mr. He had founded was called the Dark Eye. At its peak, the Dark Eye was a famous intelligence organization in the entire Dark world. After Mr. He was captured, the Dark Eye fell apart, but there were always some experienced backbones who remained loyal to him. No matter how many of them there were, they could increase the intelligence power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan said, "Let's talk about it later." He slowly turned around and left Mr. Black's room. The other 2 financial giants were studying the current financial situation. Li Tianlan stopped in front of their door, but he didn't go in. He walked to the gate of the prison. The gate opened slowly. It was dusk in the desert. The light of the setting sun shone on the yellow sand of the desert. It was silent and desolate. Li Tianlan walked to the gate and sat down. He looked at the sky in the distance and said nothing. Only the dark and exquisite Xianyuan sword was slowly rotating around him. Li Tianlan was like a statue. He would come here every day to sit for a while, but what he saw was always the yellow sand and the setting sun. The sun slowly set. Darkness shrouded the desert, and the temperature began to drop. "Your Highness." A clear voice sounded beside Li Tianlan. A touch of delicate fragrance appeared beside Li Tianlan. Xiaoqing, who was brought to the desert prison by her father, Xiao Mahai, before she graduated, quietly sat down beside Li Tianlan. She wore a very pure white dress, and her snow-white calf leaned against Li Tianlan's leg intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan didn't move. He just said yes. "Are you waiting for someone?" Xiaoqing asked carefully. She sat close to Li Tianlan and stared at his side profile. A very attractive blush appeared on the face of the girl, who had just turned 20. "No." Li Tianlan shook his head. Xiaoqing thought about it and lit a cigarette for him. She looked at Li Tianlan with a lighter in one hand and her cheek in the other. She whispered, "You look very lonely." "I'm not lonely," Li Tianlan said faintly. "Just a little lonely." He looked at the sky in the distance. It was the night and the stars. At night in the desert, heaven and earth seemed to be frozen, without any vitality. "I can." Xiaoqing's face became redder. Her voice trembled with a touch of temptation. "Your Highness, I can accompany you tonight." Li Tianlan glanced at her, shook his head, and said, "Let's go eat." Chapter 777. It rarely rained in the desert. The temperature in the prison was slightly lower than usual. Unlike the outside world, raindrops fell from the sky. Most of the raindrops evaporated before they hit the ground. Water vapor drifted in the air, and only a few raindrops fell on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan sat quietly in front of the desert prison, looking at the distant sky. His heart was as still as water, motionless. When disappointment had become the norm, all the emotions in his heart seemed to gradually turn into numb silence. The sky gradually darkened. The vast expanse of water vapor rose in the air. The darkness swallowed his figure in the night. Li Tianlan reached out and picked up the Xianyuan sword spinning around him. He reached out and rubbed the delicate blade, his eyes as quiet as the starry sky in the desert. He would sit in front of the prison gate every day for more than a month. At this time, Xiao Mahai, as the warden, would quietly guard near Li Tianlan. Sometimes he would stand for hours or even half a day. He always felt that Li Tianlan was waiting for something. But for more than a month, there was no response from his waiting. Xiao Mahai could not feel Li Tianlan's anger and disappointment, but he could clearly sense that Li Tianlan was getting quieter and quieter, as if he had completely suppressed all his emotions in his heart. The twilight on the horizon disappeared completely. Darkness enveloped the desert. The light in front of the prison gate lit up. Li Tianlan sat on the edge of the light, with his back to Xiao Mahai. His shadow was long in the light, looking lonely and cold. Xiao Mahai looked at his watch and hesitated. Finally, he couldn't help but walk over and whispered, "Your Highness, are you waiting for someone?" "No." Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at the Xianyuan sword running between his fingers. His voice was as calm as water. Xiao Mahai gave a hollow laugh. Li Tianlan had been here for more than a year, but Xiao Mahai did not establish a close relationship with him. Instead, he was more in awe of Li Tianlan. Because he had not figured out Li Tianlan's temper, he was naturally more cautious when getting along with him. He looked at the distant sky and whispered, "Then shall we go eat first?" "I'm not hungry." Li Tianlan did not look up. "Old Zhou made a few new dishes today. Your Highness should like them." "No." Li Tianlan stood up and loosened his palm. The Xianyuan sword rotated slowly around him, like a planet around a star. "I'm going out for a walk," Li Tianlan said. Xiao Mahai was stunned and didn't come back to his senses for a while. Go for a walk? In more than a year, the furthest he had walked was the distance from his dormitory to the prison gate. He had never left the confines of the prison. This was the first time he said he wanted to go out for a walk. By the time Xiao Mahai came to his senses, Li Tianlan had already walked more than 10 meters away. He hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything. He just sighed softly. He still didn't notice Li Tianlan's anger and disappointment. But he could feel that Li Tianlan was in a bad mood. "Dad, where is His Highness going?" Xiaoqing trotted over and asked. "Your Highness is not in a good mood. Let's go for a walk." Xiao Mahai shook his head. "Inform the kitchen to prepare a few dishes that His Highness likes. When he comes back, quickly make another portion." "Oh," Xiaoqing said, watching his back getting farther and farther away. A gust of wind blew in the desert at night. The rain stopped. Water vapor slowly floated all over the sky. As Li Tianlan walked, there seemed to be a thin layer of mist between heaven and earth, vague and indifferent. This picture was very beautiful. Xiaoqing's eyes were a little obsessed. The light behind him faded away, and eventually disappeared completely. The white mist full of vitality floated densely, but it didn't affect Li Tianlan's sight at all. The seemingly illusory white mist blocked the yellow sand that was blown up by the wind. Between heaven and earth, there was silence, and desolation. Loneliness and boredom seemed to go deep into the bone. Li Tianlan walked forward quietly, with no expression on his face. He didn't know where he was going, nor what he wanted to do. The depression in his heart had changed from the initial torrent to the deep sea, constantly fluctuating in his heart, and even destroying his state of concentration more than once. In more than half a year, his sleep time was getting less and less. The deep meditation on weekdays had almost completely replaced his sleeping time. His will was constantly condensing in meditation, and his swordsmanship was also advancing by leaps and bounds. This kind of practice could hardly be said to be painstaking, but even desperate. No one knew why. Li Tianlan never told anyone that he had dreamed of Qin Weibai countless times in the past 6 months. At first, it was the bits and pieces of their acquaintance. The continuous dreams were long and clear. From the first acquaintance to knowing each other, to the promise to keep each other. Everything, every picture, every word, and every look were constantly repeated in the dream. That figure had really gone deep into the soul, and then began to extend in different directions in the facts of the dream. He dreamed of growing old with Qin Weibai. He dreamed of falling out with Qin Weibai. He dreamed of parting with Qin Weibai. Countless dreams. He would meet many people in the dream, and finally, all of them became Qin Weibai. He dreamed that Qin Weibai gave birth to a son for him. The dream changed, and the son became a daughter. He dreamed that Qin Weibai stood at the top and looked down at the heroes in the world. He dreamed that he passed by Qin Weibai countless times and finally became strangers. In the dream, he ignored Qin Weibai's struggle and curses, tearing her clothes. On a snowy night, in the vast world of ice and snow, the bright sword blade pierced into his chest. Chaos. Every dream was extremely clear. Every dream had a different ending. The yearning turned into longing, surging up like a tide. Li Tianlan wanted to ask, why? He wanted to see Qin Weibai. He wanted to ask why he couldn't see her. He didn't think there was anything wrong between them. The last time they met, there was no anger or quarrel between them. Then. There was no then. He had called her, but every time, it was Horsewoman who answered the phone. Horsewoman either said she was busy or she was not there. Li Tianlan forgot how many times he had called. But Qin Weibai never responded. Gradually, Li Tianlan also fell silent. For more than a year, the man and woman who used to love each other didn't contact each other even once. He had asked the military counselor this question before. But more than a month later, there was still no answer. He was indeed waiting for someone. But for more than a month he seemed to be waiting for someone who couldn't wait. Why on earth? Li Tianlan stopped and sat down in the desert. He raised his head and looked at the sky. There was no light in the desert. The shining galaxy above the sky was incomparably bright. Li Tianlan was in a daze. He wrote the 3 words Qin Weibai on the yellow sand with his finger. Recalling the bits and pieces of the two of them together, he became more and more silent. Time was passing. The darkness was passing. The desert was silent. It seemed that he was the only one left in the world. The past seemed to have really become the past rooted in his memory. Li Tianlan smiled. He didn't know why, but he just wanted to laugh. I've seen the rainstorm sweep the desert. I've seen the galaxy cover the moonlight. I've seen the dusk chase the dawn. I want to see you, but I can't see you. Why? Li Tianlan gently tapped the Xianyuan sword. Why do you think? The delicate blade of the Xian Yuan sword swayed slightly in front of Li Tianlan, as if shaking its head. "I'm not happy," Li Tianlan said lightly. The Xian Yuan sword circled around Li Tianlan, as if thinking. Its exquisite blade suddenly trembled. A subtle but extremely sharp sword energy appeared in the yellow sand, sweeping away a large area of white fog. At this moment, Li Tianlan clearly sensed a complex and obscure will. It seemed to be a test, but also an inquiry. The Xian Yuan sword was eager to have a try. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and laughed. He nodded. "Okay." The Xian Yuan sword suddenly let out a sword cry. In an instant, the violent sword energy burst out from its delicate blade. At this moment, the desert was no longer lonely. Above the yellow sand, there was soaring fighting intent everywhere. Li Tianlan slowly stood up, looked at the constantly shaking Xian Yuan sword, and said calmly, "Make your move." Chapter 778. As the core of the 13th floor, Xian Yuan sword was a weapon, but it was a real weapon with its own life. It had its own thoughts and emotions, and the energy it absorbed on a daily basis could be regarded as its vitality. That kind of thinking could be transmitted through the sword intent. Although it couldn't speak, it could always carry out simple communication with Li Tianlan. The sword was cold. It couldn't comfort people. Or the only comfort it could give Li Tianlan was fighting. After swallowing the 4 murderous weapons, the sword energy of Xian Yuan sword became more majestic and agile. It could be said to be Li Tianlan's best opponent. This was also the road to the invincible realm that Li Tianlan had prepared for himself. Because Xian Yuan's sword was a life, but it was also a sword. It was pure enough, so its sword energy was perfect and truly balanced. In other words, with Li Tianlan's current physical state, if Xian Yuan's sword broke out with all its strength, it was enough to beat Li Tianlan. "You are unhappy, lonely, and cold. That's not a problem. I've beaten you once. Why do you still think about those messy things? If one time is not enough, then do it again." That was the idea of Xian Yuan's sword. The energy of the 4 murderous weapons was continuously instilled into Xian Yuan's sword and transformed into sword energy. Dongqing Wujin consciously strengthened the speed of filling energy for Xian Yuan's sword. In this state, Xian Yuan's sword could completely press Li Tianlan to the ground and rub him as much as it wanted. Li Tianlan's body straightened. The white mist around him surged wildly and was quickly absorbed by his body. He reached out to Xian Yuan's sword. Boom! A roar suddenly broke out in the silent desert. The dark night was almost completely illuminated in an instant. The delicate blade of Xian Yuan's sword continued to expand and became a big sword more than 2 meters high. The sword energy flew and rotated, directly enveloping Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly clenched his fists. The flying yellow sand quickly gathered in the violent sword intent and converged into an extremely slender long sword. Sand gathered into a sword. Li Tianlan held the hilt. The sword energy exploded. In the harsh buzzing sound, his figure disappeared for a moment, and when he reappeared, he was directly in front of Xian Yuan's sword. The frenzied sword light soared into the sky. The dazzling light dispelled the night in an instant. The Xian Yuan sword rose into the sky, and countless sword chi swirled wildly, turning into a tornado. The tornado completely enveloped Li Tianlan, and the sword chi kept falling from all directions. The sand sword in Li Tianlan's hand was directly smashed by the sword energy. Circumference number in the blink of an eye, the space within 100 meters boiled. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere. Everything in the surroundings was occupied by the sword chi. Without a sword in his hand, Li Tianlan made a gesture with both hands. Myriad limitless seal. The amazing destructive power was still condensing, and the Xian Yuan sword in the air had already fallen straight down. The 2-meter-long sword expanded again, turning into a 10-meter-long giant sword. The yellow sand in the sky swirled upward for a moment with Li Tianlan as the center. The Xian Yuan sword, surrounded by sword energy, had already appeared beside Li Tianlan. The huge sword rotated slightly. With a dull whistling sound, Li Tianlan's body was sent flying. The huge sword body of the Xian Yuan sword kept shaking, and the sound of the sword was endless. In Li Tianlan's sight, the sword light that filled the sky and the earth was getting brighter and brighter, but the range was getting smaller and smaller. The sword energy within a radius of hundreds of meters seemed to be condensing toward the Xianyuan sword. Li Tianlan's body landed on the yellow sand and slowly got up. The invisible sword energy was compressed to the extreme as soon as he stood up. The Xianyuan sword disappeared. A dazzling light spot suddenly burst out from the position of the Xianyuan sword, like a sword light, instantly illuminating the night sky. The light was so dazzling that it could be seen clearly even in the desert prison dozens of miles away. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. The huge sword body of the Xianyuan sword had fallen into nothingness in his perception. The dazzling sword light in front of him also seemed to be nothingness. But in the nothingness of the sword light, a clear sound of footsteps slowly rang out. The footsteps were very light, stepping on the yellow sand. There was an indescribable sharpness and danger in the sound. A figure walked out of the sword light, step by step. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. The Xianyuan sword had disappeared. The one who walked out of the sword light turned out to be another Li Tianlan. Or rather, it was Li Tianlan condensed by the sword energy of the Xianyuan sword. A little interesting. Li Tianlan laughed. Similar to the sword energy doppelganger, Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. There was no sound, and he was as quiet as a ghost. He raised his palm. It was the move that Li Tianlan was most familiar with. The first blade Wuji. The pure and bright sword light suddenly turned into a natural arc of light in his hand. The arc of light flashed and arrived in an instant. Bang! Li Tianlan's feet stepped heavily on the ground. And a loud dragon roar suddenly sounded. The desert within dozens of meters kept roaring, and the yellow sand rising into the sky turned into giant dragons one after another. Li Tianlan's body strode forward and rose into the air. One after another, the giant dragons followed Li Tianlan and rushed forward with the yellow sand all over the sky. The huge arc of sword energy was torn apart by pure force when the giant dragons rose. Li Tianlan's body was getting taller and taller, and his limbs were stretched to the extreme. He fiercely smashed toward his other self on the ground like a cannonball. The fifth blade flying snow. The figure condensed by the sword energy of Xianyuan sword rose into the sky. The rain in the desert had stopped not long ago. The water vapor in the sky was constantly condensed in the sword intent. There was a clear sound of condensation in the air. A large area of ice imprisoned a large area of yellow sand dragons. Li Tianlan had landed from the air. Dragon fist flying dragon in the sky. Crack. The huge and thick ice layer was smashed by a punch. The pale lightning burst out from Li Tianlan's body. His figure smashed the ice layer and the sword energy doppelganger in an instant. The blade of Xianyuan sword appeared for a moment. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan directly reached out and grabbed the hilt. Xianyuan sword, which was about the same size as Li Tianlan, almost instinctively quieted down for a moment. Then it seemed to remember that it was a battle, and the dark sword began to shake violently. Li Tianlan held the hilt tightly. The huge power of the dual wind and thunder veins all fell on Xianyuan's sword. Li Tianlan's figure was as steady as a rock. His face was a little pale, but his smile was extremely happy. I won. Crack. Before he could finish speaking, the exquisite Xianyuan sword suddenly shattered. The sword energy that seemed to be several times more terrifying than before broke out in an instant. The broken Xianyuan sword directly left Li Tianlan's control. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth suddenly twitched. Looking at the scene in front of him, he fell completely silent. Xianyuan's sword became an extremely delicate small sword again. The dark sword body floated in the air. But it was not alone. For small swords suddenly appeared beside Xianyuan's sword and slowly rotated around him, like stars surrounding the moon. Li Tianlan looked at the four small swords that suddenly appeared in silence. Every one of them seemed to be familiar. But he didn't know any of them. But every one of them seemed to have an inseparable connection with him now. They floated around Xianyuan's sword and formed a whole. They seemed to be observing Li Tianlan curiously. Li Tianlan was in a trance. At this moment, he suddenly thought of a conversation in Yuzhou. The conversation between him and Li Guangtu. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.